The ballroom shimmered with golden lights reflecting off crystal chandeliers, and the air buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses. Alessandra Hartwell stood near the bar, her emerald cocktail dress catching the warm glow as she scanned the crowd for her husband. 10 years of marriage had taught her to recognize his laugh across any room, that deep, genuine sound that had first drawn her to him at a college party when they were both young and full of dreams they hadn't yet learned to doubt. But tonight, for the past 20 minutes, that familiar sound had been conspicuously absent. She checked her phone again. 10:47 in the evening. The annual company holiday party was in full swing at the Grand Meridian Hotel, a luxurious venue the corporation rented every December to celebrate another successful year. Alessandra had been working at Morrison & Klein Financial Services for 7 years now, the same amount of time as her husband, Brennan. They had met long before joining the company, but when an opportunity arose for both of them to work at one of the most prestigious financial firms in the region, they had seized it together. It seemed perfect at the time, a partnership both personal and professional. She took a sip of her wine, the crisp white coating her tongue as her eyes continued their methodical search. Groups of colleagues clustered around high tables, their faces flushed with alcohol and holiday cheer. The senior partners held court near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. Junior analysts congregated by the dessert table, nervous and eager to make good impressions. But Brennan was nowhere in the main ballroom. Alessandra set down her glass and began moving through the crowd, her heels clicking softly against the polished marble floor. She smiled and nodded at familiar faces, exchanged brief pleasantries with colleagues from other departments, but her focus remained singular. Where was he? Brennan had been standing beside her less than half an hour ago, engaged in small talk with the head of accounting when he had excused himself. She had assumed he was going to the restroom, but 20 minutes was far too long for that. A knot of unease began tightening in her stomach, that primitive instinct that whispers when something is wrong even before the conscious mind catches up. She tried to dismiss it as paranoia, as the wine playing tricks with her nerves, but the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing moment. She approached the main corridor that led away from the ballroom, where the hotel's conference rooms and private event spaces stretched in both directions. The sounds of the party faded behind her, replaced by the muted hush of thick carpeting and expensive silence. Wall sconces cast soft pools of light every few feet, creating alternating patches of brightness and shadow. Alessandra walked slowly, her ears straining for any sound, any clue. And then she saw him. Brennan emerged from a side corridor to her left, about 30 feet away. Relief flooded through her for exactly 2 seconds before her brain registered the details that transformed relief into something cold and sharp. His hair, normally combed with meticulous care, was disheveled, strands falling across his forehead in a way that looked less styled and more messed. His tie, which had been perfectly straight when they arrived, now hung slightly askew. His jacket seemed rumpled, as though hastily pulled back on. But it was his face that truly caught her attention, the flushed quality of his cheeks, the way his eyes darted nervously before settling on her, the almost guilty set of his jaw. Alessandra's feet carried her forward, even as her mind began cataloging every wrong detail. As the distance between them closed, a scent hit her, unmistakable and visceral. Perfume. Strong, floral, expensive perfume that definitely was not hers. She wore a light citrus scent, barely there, subtle. This was bold, heavy, the kind of fragrance that announced itself, that clung to fabric and skin and refused to be ignored. "Hey, sweetheart." Brennan's voice came out slightly strained, forced casualness wrapped around an edge of something she couldn't quite name. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I was just heading back to find you." "Where were you?" The question emerged more sharply than she intended. her tone cutting through the polite veneer she normally maintained in public settings. I ran into Marcus from operations, and we got talking about the Henderson account, Brennan said smoothly. Too smoothly, his answer arriving with the practiced ease of something prepared. Lost track of time. You know how it is. Alessandra's eyes traveled over him again, taking in every detail with the precision of someone who had spent 7 years analyzing financial statements for inconsistencies. The rumpled jacket, the askew tie, the disheveled hair, the perfume that grew stronger the closer she stood to him, and beneath it all, that telltale flush on his face, the slight sheen of sweat on his forehead, despite the hotel's perfect climate control. Before she could respond, before she could ask the questions beginning to form like storm clouds in her mind, another figure appeared from the same side corridor Brennan had emerged from. Alessandra's breath caught in her throat. Sloan Whitmore, the regional director and Brennan's direct supervisor, walked toward them with measured steps, her expression carefully composed into professional pleasantness. She was 39 years old, impeccably dressed in a navy designer dress that probably cost more than Alessandra's monthly salary. Her auburn hair swept into an elegant updo. Sloan was married with 2 children, their smiling faces displayed prominently in silver frames on her desk. She was known throughout the company as ruthlessly efficient, politically savvy, and utterly devoted to her family. But right now, right in this moment, Sloane's hair showed wisps that had escaped the careful arrangement, subtle but noticeable to anyone paying attention. Her lipstick, which had been perfectly applied earlier in the evening, now appeared slightly smudged at the corners, and her dress, though still elegant, showed faint creases that hadn't been there before. "Brennan, thank you so much for helping with the car situation," Sloane said brightly, her voice carrying that polished professionalism she wielded like armor. She smiled at Alessandra, warm and open, as though this were the most natural encounter in the world. "My car wouldn't start in the parking garage. Battery issue, I think. Your husband was kind enough to come take a look when I mentioned it. We tried jumping it, but no luck. I will have to call roadside assistance tomorrow." Alessandra felt her stomach drop, that sensation of the floor tilting beneath her feet, while her expression remained frozen in polite attention. The explanation was plausible, completely plausible. People helped each other with car trouble all the time, especially at company events where professional courtesy was expected. And yet, "Of course," Brennan added quickly, his voice gaining confidence now that backup had arrived. "I heard Sloane mention the problem to someone near the bar, so I offered to take a look. Thought I could save her the hassle of calling for help during the party, but the battery was completely dead. Nothing we could do without proper cables." Sloane nodded, her smile never wavering. "Exactly. We were in the garage for what? 15 minutes? 20? Trying different things, but ultimately, no luck. I really appreciate you taking the time, Brennan. Very thoughtful. 20 minutes. The timeline matched. The explanation held together. And yet, that perfume, that heavy floral scent, wrapped around Alessandra's husband like accusation. And yet the slight tremor in Brennan's voice when he first spoke. And yet the way Sloane's eyes didn't quite meet Alessandra's directly, sliding just slightly to the left, focusing on a point somewhere near her ear rather than making true eye contact. "No problem at all," Brennan said, reaching out to touch Alessandra's lower back, a gesture of casual intimacy they had shared thousands of times. But tonight, the touch felt performative, staged, as though he were demonstrating their connection for an audience, rather than expressing genuine affection. Alessandra forced a smile, the muscles of her face arranging themselves into the appropriate shape, while her mind churned beneath the pleasant facade. "That was very kind of you both. I hope you can get it sorted out tomorrow, Sloane. I am sure I will. My husband, Fletcher, is quite good with these things. I will have him take a look in the morning." Sloane glanced at her watch, a delicate gold piece that caught the light. "Well, I should get back to the party. Need to make my rounds, shake some hands. You know how it is." She gave them both a final smile and walked past, her heels clicking purposefully against the marble as she headed back toward the ballroom. Brennan exhaled, a long breath that seemed to release tension Alessandra hadn't realized he was holding. Ready to head back in? I could use another drink. She looked at him, really looked at him, studying the man she had shared a bed with for 10 years, the man whose morning routines she knew by heart, whose coffee preferences she could recite without thinking, whose presence in her life had become as fundamental as breathing. And in that moment, standing in the muted lighting of an expensive hotel corridor with the distant sounds of celebration echoing from the ballroom, Alessandra realized with chilling clarity that she did not believe him. She did not believe the car story. She did not believe the casual timeline. She did not believe the convenient appearance of his boss offering corroboration. The perfume was too strong, too fresh, clinging to him in a way that suggested close contact, sustained proximity, not the brief interaction of someone leaning over an engine in a parking garage. The disheveled appearance spoke of rushed adjustment, hasty reconstruction of professional composure. And that look in his eyes, that fleeting moment of panic before he settled into his explanation, was the look of someone caught, someone scrambling for cover. But she said none of this. Not here, not now, not in a public space where colleagues might overhear, where professional reputations hung in delicate balance. Instead, she linked her arm through his, feeling the warmth of his body through the fabric of his jacket, and smiled. Sure, let's get that drink. They walked back to the ballroom together, a picture of marital unity, while inside Alessandra's chest, something fundamental had shifted, cracked, begun the slow process of breaking apart. She smiled at colleagues, made small talk with people from human resources, laughed at appropriate moments, all while her mind replayed those 20 minutes over and over, examining every detail, every inconsistency, every wrong note in the carefully orchestrated explanation she had been given. The party continued around them, golden light and cheerful noise and the illusion of celebration. Brennan stayed close to her side for the rest of the evening, attentive and affectionate, his hand finding hers, his arm draping around her waist, all the small gestures of a devoted husband. But Alessandra felt each touch like a lie pressed against her skin, each smile like a mask slipping further out of alignment with the truth beneath. At 11:30, they left the party together, collected their coats from the check, and walked to their car in the parking garage. Alessandra's eyes scanned the rows of vehicles, looking for Sloane's car, but couldn't identify it in the sea of dark sedans and SUVs. Not that it mattered. The car story was a lie. She was certain of it now. Certain with the kind of bone-deep knowledge that comes from intuition honed by years of intimate familiarity with another person's patterns and tells. The drive home passed in relative silence, broken only by Brennan's occasional comments about the party, about colleagues, about the upcoming holiday break. Alessandra responded with appropriate sounds of agreement, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, watching the white lines rush past in the darkness. When they reached their house, a comfortable two-story colonial in a quiet suburban neighborhood, Brennan immediately headed upstairs to change. Alessandra stood in the kitchen, still wearing her emerald dress, listening to the sound of running water from the shower. He was washing off the evidence, she thought, washing away that perfume, that guilt, that 20-minute gap in the evening that reeked of betrayal. She walked slowly through the first floor, her heels abandoned by the front door, her bare feet silent on hardwood, and then carpet. They had lived in this house for 6 years, filled it with furniture chosen together, art purchased on vacations, small accumulations of a shared life. Wedding photos smiled at her from the mantel. A quilt her mother had made them draped across the back of the couch. The wine rack held bottles they had been saving for special occasions. Everything looked the same. Everything felt different. Alessandra stood in front of the fireplace, staring at their wedding photo, at the young versions of themselves frozen in that moment of joy and promise. Brennan had been 28, she 25, both of them convinced they had found something rare and precious, something that would last 10 years, a decade of building a life together, of morning coffee and shared jokes, of supporting each other through career challenges and family losses, of planning futures that always included each other. And tonight, in 20 minutes in a hotel corridor, with perfume clinging to his clothes and lies falling easily from his lips, that foundation had cracked. Alessandra heard the shower shut off upstairs, heard Brennan moving around in their bedroom. Soon he would come downstairs, probably suggest they watch something before bed, maintain the comfortable routines of their marriage, and she would go through the motions, would respond appropriately, would not yet reveal the suspicion eating through her chest like acid, because she needed to know. Not suspect, not intuit, not feel in her gut. She needed to know with certainty, with evidence that could not be explained away, with proof that would settle once and for all whether the man she married was the man she thought he was, or whether the past 10 years had been built on foundations far more fragile than she had ever imagined. The next morning arrived with winter sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows. Alessandra had barely slept, her mind churning through scenarios, possibilities, explanations both innocent and damning. Beside her, Brennan slept peacefully, his breathing deep and even, his face relaxed in a way that seemed almost mocking given the turmoil in her own thoughts. She slipped out of bed quietly, dressed in comfortable clothes, and made coffee in the kitchen. Saturday morning. No work obligations. Brennan would probably sleep late, having consumed more alcohol at the party than usual. She had time. At 7:30 in the morning, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she recognized, the main line for Morrison and Klein's building security. Odd. Why would building security be calling her on a Saturday morning? Hello? Mrs. Hartwell? This is Iris Callahan from night security at Morrison and Klein. The voice was older, female, careful. Alessandra knew Iris, had known her for years. Iris was a woman in her 60s who had worked as night security for over 15 years. A quiet presence most employees barely acknowledged, but Alessandra had always made a point of greeting her warmly, asking about her grandchildren, treating her like the valuable team member she was rather than part of the invisible service infrastructure. Iris, hello. Is everything okay? A pause, waited with hesitation. Mrs. Hartwell, I hope you do not mind me calling. I got your cell number from the employee directory. I do not usually involve myself in personal matters. That is not my place. But you have always been kind to me, always treated me with respect, when so many others walk past like I am part of the furniture. And last night, during my rounds reviewing the security footage, I saw something that troubled me, something I think you should know about. Alessandra's hand tightened around her phone, her heart beginning to pound in her chest. What did you see? Not over the phone. Can you come to the building this morning? I am here until 8 o'clock. Then I am off duty. I will be in the security office. What I have to show you, it is better if you see it yourself. I made a copy on a USB drive for you. It is yours to do with as you wish. The call ended with Alessandra's promise to be there within the hour. She stood in her kitchen, coffee growing cold in her hands, staring at nothing and everything simultaneously. Security footage, evidence, the truth, whatever it might be, waiting for her in digital format on a small plastic drive. She left a note for Brennan on the kitchen counter, casual and unrevealing. Went to run some errands. Back later. Love you. That last part stuck in her throat. Those 2 words that had been so easy, so automatic for a decade, now feeling like performance art. Empty syllables she forced herself to write, because anything else would raise questions she was not yet ready to answer. The drive to the Morrison and Klein building took 35 minutes through light Saturday morning traffic. The downtown office complex rose 42 stories into the pale winter sky, glass and steel reflecting clouds. The parking garage was nearly empty. just a handful of cars belonging to the weekend warriors who came in on Saturdays to catch up on work or impress superiors with their dedication. Alessandra took the elevator to the ground floor security office, a small suite of rooms tucked away behind the main lobby. Iris was waiting, her gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, her security uniform pressed and professional despite the late hour of her shift. "Mrs. Hartwell, thank you for coming." Iris's weathered face showed concern, her dark eyes meeting Alessandra's with directness and compassion. "Please, sit down." The security office was cramped but functional. Banks of monitors showing various areas of the building, equipment humming softly, the smell of old coffee and electronics. Iris gestured to a chair and closed the door, ensuring privacy. "As I said on the phone, I do not make a habit of involving myself in people's personal lives. I have seen a lot in 15 years here, and I have learned that most times it is better to mind my own business." Iris pulled out a small USB drive from her pocket, held it between her fingers like something precious and dangerous. "But you have always been different, Mrs. Hartwell. You see people like me. You remember our names, ask about our families, treat us like human beings instead of obstacles or part of the background. That kind of kindness is rare, and it matters." Alessandra's throat tightened. "What is on that drive, Iris?" Iris took a breath, her expression pained. "Last night, after the party ended and most people had left, I was doing my usual security rounds, reviewing the footage from the evening to make sure everything was in order. Standard procedure. And I came across footage from the hotel where your company had the party. We contract with their security system for major events, so their cameras feed into our network temporarily for insurance and liability purposes." She paused, giving Alessandra one last chance to refuse, to walk away, to preserve the ignorance that sometimes felt easier than knowledge. But Alessandra did not walk away. "Show me." Iris connected the USB drive to her computer and pulled up a video file. The image was in black and white, slightly grainy, the timestamp reading December 14th, 10:47 in the evening. The same time Alessandra had been searching for Brennan. The same 20 minutes that had cracked open her world. The video showed a hallway in the hotel, one of the side corridors lined with conference rooms and private event spaces. At 10:47 and 12 seconds, two figures entered the frame, Brennan and Sloan. Alessandra watched, her body going very still, very cold. On screen, Brennan approached one of the conference room doors, pulled out a key card, and swiped it. The door unlocked. He glanced down the hallway in both directions, his body language alert, checking, ensuring privacy. Then he reached out, his hand finding Sloane's lower back, and guided her through the door with unmistakable intimacy, his fingers spreading possessively across the fabric of her navy dress. The door closed behind them. The timestamp read 10:47 and 38 seconds. The video jumped forward, the timestamp now showing 11:07 and 14 seconds, exactly 19 minutes and 36 seconds later. The conference room door opened, and Sloane emerged first. She paused just outside the door, her hands moving to smooth her dress, to check her hair, adjusting and straightening with the practiced efficiency of someone reconstructing a carefully maintained appearance. Her lipstick was visibly smudged, even in the grainy black and white footage. Brennan appeared seconds later, his jacket in his hands, pulling it on as he stepped into the hallway. His hair was disheveled, his tie loosened. He ran a hand through his hair, attempting to restore some order, then adjusted his tie, pulled his jacket straight. They spoke, their mouths moving, words Alessandra could not hear but could imagine. Sloane reached up, her hand cupping Brennan's face with unmistakable tenderness, unmistakable intimacy, the gesture of a lover, not a colleague. He leaned into the touch for just a moment, his eyes closing briefly, before they both seemed to remember where they were, what they risked. They separated, walking in different directions. Sloane headed back toward the ballroom. Brennan went the opposite way, presumably to compose himself further before rejoining the party. before returning to his wife with lies about car trouble and dead batteries. The video ended. The screen went black. Silence filled the security office, broken only by the soft hum of equipment and the sound of Alessandra's breathing, shallow and controlled, as though her body had forgotten how to process oxygen. "I am so sorry," Iris said quietly, her hand reaching out but not quite touching Alessandra's arm, respecting the distance people sometimes need when their worlds are breaking. "I debated whether to show you, whether it was my place, but if it were me, if it were my husband, I would want to know. I would want the truth, no matter how much it hurt." Alessandra stared at the blank screen, her mind replaying those images over and over. Brennan checking the hallway, his hand on Sloane's back, the door closing. 19 minutes and 36 seconds. Her tender touch on his face, the way he leaned into it, the lies that followed. "Thank you for showing me," Alessandra heard herself say, her voice coming from somewhere distant, disconnected. "Thank you for caring enough to tell me the truth." "The USB is yours," Iris said, pressing the small device into Alessandra's palm. "I made it specifically for you. No one else knows about this. What you do with it, that is your choice. But you deserved to know." Alessandra closed her fingers around the USB drive, feeling its weight, insignificant and life-altering simultaneously. Evidence, proof, the death of plausible deniability, and the birth of irrefutable certainty. Alessandra sat in her car in the parking garage for 20 minutes, the USB drive resting in her palm like a small piece of concentrated poison. The engine was off, the winter air seeping slowly through the metal shell of the vehicle, but she barely noticed the cold. Her mind replayed the security footage in endless loop, each detail burning itself deeper into her memory with every repetition. The way Brennan had checked the hallway before pulling Sloane inside. The casual confidence of someone who had done this before, who knew exactly what he was doing. The 19 minutes and 36 seconds. The tender touch afterward. The lies that came so easily. She thought about the story they had told her. The car with the dead battery. The helpful husband volunteering his assistance. Sloane's grateful smile. Brennan's casual explanation. The way they had tag-teamed the deception. Their stories aligning perfectly, delivered with such practiced smoothness that anyone else might have believed them completely. Would have believed them completely. But Alessandra's instincts had screamed the truth, even before she had proof, her body recognizing betrayal before her mind could articulate it. 20 minutes in a conference room, 20 minutes stolen from a company party, from their colleagues, from their spouses, 20 minutes that destroyed 10 years of marriage, that revealed the man she had trusted most in the world as someone she did not know at all. But this was just one night. One incident captured on camera. The question that gnawed at Alessandra as she finally started her car and pulled out of the parking garage was not whether Brennan had cheated. That was answered, documented, irrefutable. The question was, how long? How many times? Whether last night was an isolated mistake or part of a pattern. A systematic deception that stretched back weeks, months, possibly longer. She needed more information, more evidence, a complete picture of exactly what her husband had been doing and for how long. Alessandra drove home slowly, her mind already formulating a plan. When she walked through the front door at 9:30 in the morning, she found Brennan in the kitchen making breakfast, still in his pajama pants and an old college sweatshirt, his hair damp from a shower. He smiled when he saw her. The same warm smile that had greeted her thousands of mornings before. "Hey, you! Went out early." He poured her a cup of coffee from the pot he had just brewed, added cream the way she liked it, and handed it to her. "Everything okay?" "Just needed to pick up a few things," Alessandra said, accepting the coffee, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. The normalcy of the gesture felt surreal, participating in the choreography of their morning routine, while carrying knowledge that would destroy it. "Did you sleep well?" Like the dead. That party wore me out. Brennan returned to the stove, where eggs were scrambling in a pan. Want some breakfast? I am making enough for both of us. Sure, thank you. She sat at the kitchen table, the USB drive tucked safely in her purse, and watched him cook. He moved through their kitchen with easy familiarity, humming softly to himself, completely at ease. No guilt shadowed his features. No shame weighed on his shoulders. He had cheated on her less than 12 hours ago, lied directly to her face, and now stood making scrambled eggs as though nothing in the world was wrong. The realization crystallized something cold and sharp in Alessandra's chest. This was not a man racked with remorse. This was not someone struggling with guilt, wrestling with conscience, contemplating confession. This was someone who had compartmentalized his betrayal so completely that it simply did not touch his daily life, his domestic routines, his relationship with his wife. He could betray her, and then make her breakfast without the slightest cognitive dissonance. They ate together at the kitchen table, discussing mundane weekend plans. Brennan mentioned needing to go into the office on Sunday for a few hours to catch up on the Henderson account, a major project that had been consuming significant time over the past few months. Alessandra nodded, made appropriate sounds of understanding, all while her mind locked onto that detail. Sunday, the office. Was that true? Or another lie? Another convenient excuse to meet Sloane? I will probably head in around 10 in the morning. Be done by early afternoon, Brennan continued, finishing his eggs. Should not take more than 3 or 4 hours. Then we can do something in the evening if you want. Maybe catch a movie? Sounds good, Alessandra said, her voice steady and unrevealing. I will probably just relax here, catch up on some reading. But she would not be relaxing. She would be investigating. Because if Brennan was going to the office on Sunday, she needed to know if that was legitimate work or another rendezvous with his boss. The rest of Saturday passed in careful performance. They ran errands together, picked up groceries, stopped by the dry cleaner. Brennan was attentive and affectionate, his hand finding hers as they walked through the supermarket, his arm around her shoulders while they waited in line. To any outside observer, they looked like exactly what they were supposed to be, a happily married couple spending a relaxed weekend together. But Alessandra felt like she was living in a play, reciting lines and hitting marks, while something entirely different churned beneath the surface. Every touch from Brennan felt contaminated. Every smile felt like mockery. Every casual endearment felt like another small deception layered atop the massive one. That night, after Brennan fell asleep beside her, Alessandra lay awake in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. She could hear his steady breathing, feel the warmth of his body next to hers, and she felt profoundly alone in a way she had never experienced before. This man, this person sharing her bed, was a stranger. Or perhaps she was the stranger, the fool who had believed in something that never truly existed. Sunday morning arrived with pale winter sunlight. Brennan woke early, showered, dressed in casual business clothes appropriate for weekend office work. At 9:45, he kissed Alessandra goodbye, grabbed his laptop bag, and headed out the door with a promise to be home by early afternoon. Alessandra waited exactly 10 minutes before she moved into action. She showered quickly, dressed in nondescript dark clothes, and drove to Morrison and Klein. She parked several blocks away, where her car would not be visible from the building, and walked to a coffee shop across the street that offered a clear view of the main entrance and parking garage. She ordered a latte she did not want, and settled into a corner table by the window, her phone in hand, her eyes locked on the building. If Brennan really was there to work, she would see him eventually, perhaps leaving for lunch or coffee. If he was there for another reason, she might see Sloane arrive as well. At 10:32 in the morning, a sleek silver sedan pulled into the parking garage entrance. Even from across the street, Alessandra recognized the car and the driver. Sloane Whitmore, supposedly at home with her husband and children on a Sunday morning, was entering the building less than an hour after Brennan had arrived. Alessandra's hands tightened around her phone. Not a coincidence. Not legitimate work. This was a pattern, a routine, a system of deception that had been operating right under her nose. She stayed in the coffee shop for 3 hours, nursing drinks she barely tasted, watching the building with focused intensity. Neither Brennan nor Sloane emerged during that time. Whatever they were doing inside, it required no breaks, no departures, no visibility. At 1:47 in the afternoon, Sloane's silver sedan exited the parking garage, turning left and disappearing into traffic. 23 minutes later, Brennan's dark blue SUV followed, heading in the opposite direction, presumably back to their house. Alessandra remained seated for another 15 minutes, her mind processing what she had witnessed. They coordinated their arrivals and departures carefully, ensuring they were never seen leaving together, maintaining the fiction of separate legitimate work. How many times had they done this? How many Sunday mornings had Brennan kissed her goodbye with lies on his lips, claiming urgent projects and deadlines, while actually meeting his mistress in an empty office building? She thought back over the past few months, mentally cataloging all the Sunday mornings when Brennan had claimed work obligations. There had been many, too many. The Henderson account, he always said, critical deadlines, important presentations to prepare, and she had believed him, had never questioned, had trusted completely. That evening, when Brennan arrived home at 2:30, Alessandra was reading in the living room, the picture of domestic contentment. He bent down to kiss the top of her head, his laptop bag slung over his shoulder. "How was work?" she asked, her voice light and casual. "Productive. Got a lot done on the Henderson files. Should be in good shape for the presentation on Tuesday." He stretched, rolling his shoulders. "I am going to shower and change. Still want to catch that movie tonight?" "Absolutely." They went to a 7 o'clock showing of a comedy neither of them particularly cared about, sat in the dark theater surrounded by strangers, and laughed at appropriate moments. Brennan bought popcorn and held her hand, and Alessandra smiled and participated in the charade while her mind was elsewhere, plotting, planning, calculating her next moves. Because now she knew. This was not a one-time mistake, not a moment of weakness at a holiday party. This was systematic, ongoing, calculated betrayal. Every Sunday morning for months, possibly longer. Every lie told with casual ease. Every touch contaminated by deception. And if she was going to respond, if she was going to take action, she needed every piece of evidence she could gather. She needed to understand the full scope of what had been done to her before deciding how to proceed. Monday morning, Alessandra arrived at work early, before most of the office had filled with employees. She went directly to the security office on the ground floor, where the day shift security guard was just settling in for his shift. She did not know him as well as Iris, but she had always been polite and friendly, another habit that was about to pay dividends. "Good morning, Mrs. Hartwell," the guard said, an older man named Thomas with gray hair and a weathered face. "You are in early today." "Hi, Thomas. I was wondering if I could ask you something, and I would really appreciate your discretion." Alessandra kept her voice low, confidential. "Iris Callahan helped me with something over the weekend, and I was hoping to access some additional building entry records. I have authorization from my department to review security logs for a project I am working on." The lie came easily, surprisingly so, born of necessity and pain. Thomas hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the request. Building entry records were technically confidential, accessible only to security personnel and senior management. But Alessandra had years of goodwill built up, years of treating security staff like valued colleagues rather than invisible obstacles. "What specifically do you need to see?" Thomas asked carefully. "I need to know the entry times for 2 specific employee badges over the past 3 months. Sundays only. For a report I am compiling on weekend work patterns." Another lie, smooth and convincing. Thomas studied her face for a long moment, clearly sensing that something more personal was at stake, but unwilling to pry. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Give me the employee numbers, and I will pull the records. But this stays between us. Understood?" "Absolutely. Thank you, Thomas." 10 minutes later, Alessandra stood in the security office staring at a printout that confirmed her worst suspicions. Over the past 3 months, 12 consecutive Sundays showed entries for both Brennan's employee badge and Sloane's employee badge, always arriving within 30 minutes of each other, always departing separately hours later. 12 Sundays, 12 mornings of lies, 12 betrayals, systematic and deliberate. The earliest entry was from 3 months ago, mid-September. The pattern was consistent, unwavering, almost clockwork in its regularity. Every single Sunday, without fail, they met. And every single Sunday, Brennan had come home and acted as though he had spent the morning alone, working diligently on legitimate projects. Alessandra folded the printout carefully and tucked it into her bag alongside the USB drive. Evidence, documentation, proof that could not be explained away, could not be dismissed as misunderstanding or coincidence. She returned to her desk on the 14th floor, sat down in her ergonomic chair, and stared at her computer screen without seeing it. Around her, the office hummed with morning activity, colleagues greeting each other, phones ringing, the familiar rhythms of corporate life. Everything looked normal. Everything was irrevocably changed. 3 months of systematic deception, 3 months of coordinated betrayal. And the question that haunted Alessandra as she sat in her office, surrounded by the trappings of her professional life, was not just about revenge or justice. It was about the fundamental nature of the man she had married. Who was Brennan Hartwell, really? The kind, attentive husband she thought she knew, or the calculating liar who could maintain dual realities with such practiced ease? During her lunch break, Alessandra did something she had never considered doing before in 10 years of marriage. She went through Brennan's text messages. She knew his phone password. They had always been open with each other, or so she had believed. No secrets, no locked devices, complete transparency. That transparency now felt like another layer of deception, a false sense of security, while the real communication happened elsewhere, through channels she had not thought to monitor. His text history with Sloane was extensive but carefully sanitized. Professional messages about projects, meeting times, client updates, nothing explicitly romantic or sexual. But reading between the lines, knowing what she now knew, Alessandra could see the coded language, the subtle intimacy wrapped in corporate jargon. "Running behind this morning. We'll be there by 10:30. That was from 2 Sundays ago. "Henderson files are looking excellent. Great collaboration. From last month. "Next Sunday works better for me than Saturday. More time to focus." From 6 weeks ago. Every message could be read as innocent professional communication. But every message took on sinister meaning when viewed through the lens of their actual relationship. They were careful, strategic, using work as cover for their affair, hiding in plain sight beneath the veneer of corporate collaboration. Alessandra found herself wondering about the logistics, the planning required to maintain such deception. Did they communicate through other means, deleted messages, or alternate apps? Did they meet places beyond Sunday mornings at the office? Had they taken business trips together, legitimate work travel that doubled as romantic getaways? She opened Brennan's calendar app, scanning back through several months. There, in late October, a 3-day conference in Chicago that both he and Sloane had attended. Different hotel rooms officially, but Alessandra now doubted that meant separate sleeping arrangements. In early November, a client meeting in Boston, overnight stay required. Sloane had been copied on those travel emails. Every business trip suddenly became suspect. Every late night at the office, every weekend work session. How much of Brennan's professional life had actually been professional, and how much had been elaborate cover for an ongoing affair? That evening, Alessandra sat across from Brennan at their dinner table, watching him eat the pasta she had prepared, listening to him talk about his day, his upcoming meetings, the usual comfortable conversation of long married couples. He looked tired, she thought, dark circles under his eyes that had not been there a few months ago. The affair was taking its toll. The constant maintenance of lies, the juggling of two separate lives. Good, she thought with cold satisfaction. Let him be exhausted. Let the weight of his deception drag on him. But he showed no signs of confession, no hints of guilt or remorse. He was completely committed to the lie, completely invested in maintaining the illusion of their marriage while simultaneously destroying it from within. After dinner, while Brennan watched television in the living room, Alessandra retreated to their home office, ostensibly to catch up on some work emails. Instead, she opened her laptop and began documenting everything she knew: dates, times, evidence, observations. She created a detailed timeline of the affair as far as she could reconstruct it, noting every Sunday morning, every suspicious business trip, every lie she could now identify in retrospect. She also began researching something else: Sloane's husband, Fletcher Whitmore. If she was going to take action, if she was going to respond to this betrayal in a way that had real consequences, she needed allies, and the other betrayed spouse seemed like the natural choice. Fletcher Whitmore was 45 years old, a successful corporate attorney specializing in employment law and business litigation. He had an impressive resume, a prestigious firm, and apparently a wife who was systematically cheating on him with a subordinate. From his professional biography and LinkedIn profile, he appeared to be exactly the kind of person who would not take such betrayal lightly, who would have both the resources and the temperament to respond decisively. Alessandra found his office contact information easily enough. His firm had a website with direct phone numbers and email addresses for all attorneys. She stared at the information for a long time, her finger hovering over the trackpad, weighing the consequences of what she was considering. Contacting Fletcher would escalate everything. It would take the situation from private knowledge to shared information, from her solitary burden to coordinated action. It would declare war, in a sense, remove any possibility of quiet resolution or private reconciliation. Not that Alessandra wanted reconciliation. The man she had married no longer existed, if he ever had. But once she contacted Fletcher, once she shared what she knew, there would be no going back, no undoing the chain of events that would follow. She closed the laptop without sending any messages. Not yet. She needed to think, to plan, to make absolutely certain of her course of action before committing to it. That night, lying in bed next to Brennan, listening to his steady breathing in the darkness, Alessandra made her decision. She would contact Fletcher Whitmore. She would share everything she knew. She would ensure that both betrayers faced consequences for their actions, that both marriages ended with clarity and justice rather than confusion and gaslighting. But first, she needed one more piece of evidence: the credit card statements. If Brennan and Sloane had been conducting an affair for 3 months, there would be financial traces: restaurants, hotels, expenses that did not align with their official stories. She needed to access the corporate credit card records, the expenses Brennan had been submitting for reimbursement, and see what patterns emerged. Tuesday morning, Alessandra arrived at work with renewed purpose. She had a plan now, clear and methodical. Gather all evidence. Contact Fletcher Whitmore. Prepare for divorce. Ensure consequences. The first step required accessing financial records that were not normally part of her job responsibilities. But Alessandra had worked at Morrison & Klein for 7 years, had built relationships throughout the organization, and knew exactly who to ask for help without raising suspicion. She went to the accounting department on the 9th floor, where she found Janet Reeves, a woman in her 50s who had been with the company for over 20 years and who Alessandra had befriended during various cross-departmental projects. "Janet, I need a favor. and I need your absolute discretion," Alessandra said quietly, closing the door to Janet's small office. Janet looked up from her computer, her expression immediately concerned. "What is going on, Alessandra? You look terrible. Are you okay?" "Not really, but I will be." Alessandra sat down in the chair across from Janet's desk. "I need to see corporate credit card expense reports for 2 employees over the past 3 months. I have reason to believe there are irregularities, personal expenses being submitted as business costs." It was technically true, though not in the way Janet would assume, and the mention of irregularities and improper expense reporting was exactly the kind of thing that would motivate an accounting professional to help without asking too many personal questions. Janet's expression shifted to professional concern. "That is serious. Have you reported this through proper channels? I want to verify my suspicions before I make any formal accusations. If I am wrong, I could damage innocent people's reputations. But if I am right, I need documentation before approaching management." Janet nodded slowly, understanding the delicate position. "Which employees?" "Brennan Hartwell and Sloan Whitmore." The name combination clearly registered with Janet, her eyebrows rising slightly. As someone who processed expense reports, she would know if there were patterns, coordinated submissions, suspicious alignments. "I see. Give me until end of day. I will pull the reports and have them ready for you discreetly." "Thank you, Janet. This means more than you know." At 4:30 that afternoon, Janet appeared at Alessandra's desk with a manila folder, her expression grave. "Conference room B is empty. Let's talk there." They moved to the small conference room, and Janet closed the door, the folder unopened on the table between them. "Alessandra, before I show you this, I want to ask if you are prepared for what you might find. Sometimes knowing is harder than suspecting." "I already know," Alessandra said quietly. "I just need the documentation." Janet opened the folder, spreading out printed expense reports across the conference table. Over the past 3 months, Brennan and Sloan have submitted coordinated expense reports for multiple occasions. Same restaurants, same dates, submitted separately, but clearly the same meals. Here, here, and here. She pointed to highlighted entries. 4 different upscale restaurants, Sunday lunchtimes, both submitting receipts claiming client entertainment or business development meetings. But there are no client names listed, no follow-up documentation, nothing in the CRM system indicating actual business purposes. Alessandra scanned the reports, her trained eye immediately seeing the pattern. September 29th, October 6th, October 13th, October 20th. Every Sunday, following their morning rendezvous at the office, they were going to lunch together, expensive meals at romantic restaurants, then submitting the costs to the company as legitimate business expenses. "And this is the most troubling part," Janet continued, pulling out another set of documents. "Hotel reimbursements from the Chicago conference in late October. They both stayed at the same hotel, which is normal for a corporate conference. But Sloan submitted a reimbursement for a suite upgrade and room service charges that total over $800. Brennan submitted similar charges. The timing of the room service orders, based on the timestamps on the receipts, suggests they were in the same room. Multiple meals ordered, far more food than one person would consume, all around the same times. The evidence spread across the table painted a damning picture. This was not just an affair. This was systematic abuse of corporate resources, fraudulent expense reporting, using company money to fund their relationship. They had been stealing, essentially, charging their romance to Morrison and Klein, while pretending it was legitimate business activity. "Thank you for pulling all of this, Janet. I know this puts you in a difficult position." Janet shook her head, her expression hard. "Financial impropriety is always my concern. And, between you and me, Alessandra, I have never liked how Sloan operates. Too much ambition, too little integrity. If she is abusing her position and company resources for personal gain, that needs to be addressed. What are you going to do with this information?" "I am still deciding." But whatever I do, you will not be implicated. This conversation never happened, and if anyone asks how I obtained these records, I will say I found irregularities through my own department's financial reviews. Keep copies of everything, Janet advised, closing the folder and handing it to Alessandra. And be careful. People like Sloane do not go down quietly. She has power in this organization, and she will use it to protect herself. Alessandra accepted the folder, feeling its weight. More evidence, more proof. The picture was complete now. 3 months of systematic affair, documented through security footage, building entry logs, text message patterns, and fraudulent expense reports. It was overwhelming, irrefutable, and absolutely devastating. That evening, sitting alone in her car in the office parking garage before driving home, Alessandra finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of everything she had discovered. Not just the betrayal itself, but the calculated nature of it, the careful planning, the casual theft, the complete disregard for vows and trust, and basic decency. Brennan had not just cheated. He had built an entire parallel reality, maintained it with precision and care, and shown absolutely no remorse or hesitation. This was not a man who made a mistake. This was a man who chose betrayal systematically, repeatedly, consciously, for months, and who would clearly continue doing so indefinitely if he had not been caught. Alessandra pulled out her phone and composed an email to Fletcher Whitmore's professional address. She kept it brief, careful, designed to intrigue without revealing too much. Mr. Whitmore, my name is Alessandra Hartwell. I have information regarding your wife that I believe you should be made aware of. I realize this is an unusual contact, but the matter is serious and time-sensitive. Would you be willing to meet with me this week at a location of your choosing? I assure you this is not a prank or malicious attempt to cause trouble. I simply believe you deserve to know the truth about certain activities your wife has been engaged in. Please let me know if you are willing to meet. Respectfully, Alessandra Hartwell. She read it 3 times, making small edits, ensuring the tone was serious but not hysterical, concerned but not vindictive. Then, before she could second-guess herself, she pressed send. The response came less than 30 minutes later, while she was driving home. Mrs. Hartwell, I am willing to meet. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock in the morning, at the Riverside Cafe on Merchant Street. I will be at the corner table. Please come prepared to explain your concerns fully and provide any documentation you have. Fletcher Whitmore. Alessandra pulled over to read the email properly, her hands shaking slightly on the steering wheel. It was done. The meeting was set. In less than 24 hours, she would be sitting across from Sloane's husband, showing him the same evidence that had destroyed her own sense of reality, bringing him into the same painful knowledge she now carried. There would be no going back after tomorrow. The consequences would begin rolling forward with momentum she could not stop. Marriages would end. Careers would be damaged. Lives would change irrevocably. But as Alessandra sat in her car on the side of the road, watching traffic pass by in the gathering darkness, she felt something she had not felt in days. A sense of control, of agency, of power over her own narrative. She was not a victim waiting passively for resolution. She was an actor in her own story, making choices, taking action, ensuring justice. Tomorrow, she would meet Fletcher Whitmore. Tomorrow, she would share everything she knew. And whatever happened after that, whatever consequences followed, at least she would know she had responded with strength and clarity, rather than weakness and confusion. She pulled back into traffic and drove home to the house she shared with a man she no longer knew, to participate once more in the charade of normalcy, counting down the hours until the meeting that would change everything. The Riverside Cafe occupied a quiet corner on Merchant Street, far enough from the downtown business district to ensure privacy, but respectable enough to feel safe and neutral. Alessandra arrived 15 minutes early, her nerves stretched tight despite her careful preparation. She carried a leather portfolio containing copies of everything: the USB drive with security footage, printouts of building entry logs, the expense reports Janet had provided, screenshots of the coded text messages between Brennan and Sloan. Everything organized chronologically, documented meticulously, ready to present to a man whose life was about to shatter in much the same way hers had. She ordered a black coffee she did not want and sat at a table near the window, watching the street outside. The morning was cold and gray, threatening rain, the kind of December weather that matched her internal landscape perfectly. Her phone buzzed with a text from Brennan, sent 20 minutes earlier while she had been driving. "Hope you have a good day at work. Love you." Those 2 words again. Love you. How easily he typed them. How casually he threw them into messages and conversations, as though they meant anything at all, coming from someone who had spent 3 months systematically destroying the very concept they claimed to represent. At exactly 10 o'clock, a man entered the cafe, his eyes scanning the interior with practiced efficiency. Fletcher Whitmore was tall, probably 6 feet 2 inches, with dark hair graying at the temples and sharp features that suggested both intelligence and intensity. He wore an expensive charcoal suit, the kind that announced professional success without ostentation, and carried himself with the confident posture of someone accustomed to courtrooms and high-stakes negotiations. Their eyes met across the cafe, and Alessandra raised her hand slightly in acknowledgement. Fletcher approached her table, his expression carefully neutral, revealing nothing of what he might be thinking or feeling. "Mrs. Hartwell." His voice was deep, controlled, the voice of someone who had spent years arguing cases and managing emotions in professional settings. "Mr. Whitmore, thank you for meeting with me. I know this is unusual." Alessandra gestured to the chair across from her. Fletcher sat down, declining the waitress's offer of coffee with a polite shake of his head. He folded his hands on the table and looked at Alessandra with direct intensity. "Your email suggested you have information about my wife. I am assuming this is not a business matter, given the personal nature of your contact." "No, it is not a business matter." "Not exactly." Alessandra took a breath, steadying herself. She had rehearsed this conversation in her mind dozens of times since last night, but now that the moment had arrived, the words felt heavier than she had anticipated. "Mr. Whitmore, I am going to be direct because I believe you deserve honesty, and because what I have to show you is time-sensitive. Your wife, Sloan, has been having an affair with my husband, Brennan Hartwell, for at least the past 3 months. I have extensive documentation proving this, and I thought you should know before making any decisions about your own marriage or future." "Bitut?" Fletcher's expression did not change immediately, but Alessandra saw the slight tightening around his eyes, the barely perceptible clench of his jaw. Years of courtroom discipline kept his reaction controlled, but she could see the impact of her words landing like physical blows. "That is a serious accusation," he said quietly, his voice still level. "I assume you are not making it lightly, and that you have evidence to support it." "I do." Alessandra opened her portfolio and slid the first document across the table. "This is a printout of building entry logs from Morrison and Klein for the past 3 months, every Sunday. You will see that both Brennan's employee badge and Sloan's employee badge show entries within 30 minutes of each other, consistently, 12 consecutive Sundays. They arrive separately. They leave separately hours later, but they are in the building together for extended periods when it is otherwise empty." Fletcher picked up the document, his eyes scanning the entries with the trained precision of someone who reviewed evidence professionally. Alessandra watched him process the information, saw the moment when the pattern became undeniable, when suspicion crystallized into certainty. "Sloan told me she has been working Sundays on a major project," he said slowly, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Regional expansion initiative. High priority. She said she needed quiet time in the office to focus, without interruptions." "That may be partially true," Alessandra said gently, though there was no kindness in what she had to reveal. "But she has not been working alone. and the project she has been focused on is not professional. She slid the next item across the table. The USB drive. This contains security footage from the company holiday party last Friday night. The party was held at the Grand Meridian Hotel. Because our company contracts with their security system for major events, the footage feeds into our network temporarily. A security guard who has worked with us for 15 years pulled this footage and gave it to me because she thought I deserved to know the truth. Fletcher picked up the USB drive, turning it over in his fingers. What does it show? It shows your wife and my husband entering a conference room together at 10:47 in the evening. It shows them emerging 19.5 minutes later, both with disheveled appearances, adjusting their clothing. It shows her touching his face with clear intimacy before they separate and return to the party separately. Alessandra's voice remained steady, clinical, as though she were presenting a business report rather than describing the destruction of two marriages. When I found my husband shortly after that, he smelled strongly of perfume that was not mine. Your wife appeared moments later and told me they had been helping with her car, which supposedly had a dead battery in the parking garage. They corroborated each other's story perfectly. But the security footage proves that story was a complete fabrication. They were not in any parking garage. They were in a conference room, and what they were doing there was not innocent. Fletcher's knuckles had gone white where his hands gripped the edge of the table, but his expression remained controlled. His lawyer's training holding firm against the emotional storm she could see building behind his eyes. And you are certain this footage clearly identifies both of them. Completely certain. The timestamps are visible. Their faces are recognizable even in black and white footage. And the sequence of events is unambiguous. Alessandra paused, allowing him time to absorb the information before continuing. But there is more. She laid out the expense reports next. The highlighted entries showing coordinated submissions, identical dates, upscale restaurants, suspicious hotel charges. These are corporate expense reports from the past 3 months. Your wife and my husband have been submitting reimbursement requests for meals and hotel upgrades that appear to be personal rather than professional. Same restaurants, same dates, submitted as client entertainment or business development, but with no supporting documentation of actual business purposes. They have been using company resources to fund their relationship. Fletcher examined the expense reports with increasing anger, his professional composure beginning to crack around the edges. When he spoke, his voice was colder, harder. This is fraud. Submitting false expense reports is grounds for immediate termination, potentially criminal charges depending on the amounts involved. Sloan knows this. She has been a director for 5 years. She absolutely understands the legal and professional implications of fraudulent reimbursement claims. She does, Alessandra agreed. And she did it anyway, repeatedly, systematically, because she believed she would not get caught, and because she apparently did not care about the consequences as long as she got what she wanted. Fletcher set down the expense reports and looked at Alessandra with an expression that mixed respect and shared pain. Why are you telling me this? You could have simply filed for divorce, dealt with your husband privately. Why involve me? Because you deserve to know the truth about your marriage, just as I deserve to know the truth about mine, Alessandra said simply. Because your wife destroyed my marriage, and I thought it was only fair that you understand she destroyed yours as well. And because, frankly, I want there to be consequences. Real consequences. Not just for Brennan, but for Sloan, too. She is a director at our company. She has power and influence. She used that power to conduct an affair with a subordinate, someone she has direct authority over in terms of promotions, bonuses, performance reviews. That is not just personal betrayal. That is professional misconduct, abuse of position, and potential liability for the company. Fletcher absorbed this, his mind clearly already working through the legal and strategic implications. After a long moment, He nodded slowly. May I take copies of all this documentation? I will need to review it thoroughly, consult with my own attorneys, and determine the appropriate course of action. You can keep everything I have here. I have multiple copies stored in several secure locations. Alessandra closed the portfolio and slid it across the table to him. Everything is documented, dated, and verifiable. If you choose to take action, you will have more than enough evidence to support whatever decisions you make regarding your marriage or any legal proceedings. I will be taking action, Fletcher said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. I have been married to Sloane for 14 years. We have 2 children, ages 11 and 8. I have built my career around family values, around integrity, around the principle that commitments matter, and trust is fundamental. And she has been systematically lying to me for 3 months, using our family time as cover to conduct an affair, stealing from her employer to fund it, and apparently doing so without the slightest hesitation or remorse. He stood up, gathering the portfolio. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Mrs. Hartwell. I realize this could not have been easy for you, given your own circumstances, but you have done the right thing, and I will make sure it is not in vain. They exchanged phone numbers, a strange intimacy born of shared betrayal. 2 people whose lives had been destroyed by the same 2 people now forming an unlikely alliance. Fletcher left the cafe first, the portfolio tucked under his arm, his posture rigid with controlled fury. Alessandra remained seated for several more minutes, finishing the coffee that had gone cold, staring out the window at the gray morning. It was done. Fletcher Whitmore now knew what his wife had been doing, and given his professional background and obvious temperament, Alessandra had no doubt he would respond with devastating effectiveness. The wheels were in motion now, consequences beginning their inexorable roll forward, and nothing could stop what was coming. She returned to work, moved through the day with mechanical efficiency, attended meetings and reviewed reports, and participated in the normal rhythms of corporate life, while internally counting down toward the explosion she knew was coming. Fletcher would not waste time. Men like him, lawyers who dealt in evidence and strategy, did not sit on information. They acted decisively, struck while the iron was hot, used surprise and documentation as weapons. That evening, Alessandra arrived home to find Brennan already there, which was unusual. He typically worked until 6 or 6:30, but today he had come home early, and the moment she walked through the door, she knew something had happened. His face was pale, his eyes showing strain and worry, and he paced the living room with agitated energy. Alessandra, we need to talk. His voice was tight, stressed in a way she had not heard in years. Okay. What is going on? She set down her bag, maintaining the facade of innocent concern, though her heart had begun pounding with anticipation. I got called into a meeting today with HR and legal. Apparently, there has been a complaint filed regarding potential misconduct, inappropriate use of company resources. He ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture. They would not give me details, said it was part of an ongoing investigation, but they asked very specific questions about my expense reports from the past 3 months, about Sunday work sessions, about my professional relationship with Sloane. Sloane? Alessandra made her voice sound surprised, concerned. Your boss? Why would they be asking about her? I do not know. She was called in for a separate meeting, different time, but apparently we are both under investigation for something. Brennan sat down heavily on the couch, his face in his hands. This could be really bad, Alessandra. If there are questions about expense reports or professional conduct, that is serious. That could mean suspension, even termination, depending on what they think we did wrong. Alessandra sat down across from him, watching him with clinical detachment. He was worried about his job, about professional consequences, about potential damage to his career. Not once had he mentioned concern about their marriage, about whether she knew anything, about the actual nature of what he had done. Even now, caught in the early stages of being exposed, His first instinct was self-preservation rather than confession. "I am sure it is just a misunderstanding," she said calmly. "Have you done anything wrong with your expense reports? Submitted anything inappropriate?" "No, of course not. Everything I submitted was legitimate business expenses." But the lie came so easily, so naturally, exactly as it had for 3 months. He looked at her with what appeared to be genuine confusion, as though he truly believed his own deception. "I cannot imagine what this is about. Maybe someone made a mistake in accounting, flagged something that was actually fine. Or maybe it is about something else entirely, and they are just reviewing multiple people's records as part of some broader audit." "That is probably it," Alessandra agreed, her voice soothing and supportive, playing the role of concerned wife. "I am sure it will get cleared up quickly, once they review everything properly." Brennan nodded, clinging to the reassurance like a drowning man to driftwood. "Yeah, you are probably right. I just hate being under investigation for anything. You know, even if it is nothing, it feels terrible. Having HR questioning you, having legal involved, makes you feel like you did something wrong, even when you know you did not." Alessandra felt something cold and hard settle in her chest as she watched him lie, watched him perform innocence and confusion, watched him seek comfort from her while maintaining the betrayal that had destroyed everything between them. This was not ignorance. This was not panic preventing confession. This was calculated continued deception, choosing even now to maintain the lie rather than acknowledge the truth. She went to bed that night knowing that Fletcher had moved fast, that his complaint to Morrison and Klein's Human Resources Department had triggered an immediate investigation, and that Brennan and Sloan were now facing professional scrutiny that would inevitably uncover the affair and the fraudulent expenses. The corporate machinery had been set in motion, and it would grind forward with bureaucratic inevitability until the truth was fully exposed. Over the next several days, the investigation intensified. Alessandra watched from her position in the company, heard whispers and rumors beginning to circulate, saw Brennan growing increasingly stressed and worried as more meetings were scheduled, more questions asked, more documentation requested. He still maintained his innocence at home, still claimed confusion about what the investigation was actually examining, still performed the role of wrongly accused employee. But on Thursday afternoon, 5 days after her meeting with Fletcher Whitmore, everything came to a head. Alessandra received a text from Janet in accounting, brief and urgent. "Conference room D. Now. You need to see this." Alessandra excused herself from her desk and went to the 14th floor conference room, where she found Janet waiting with another woman from HR, a senior director named Patricia Reynolds, who handled serious misconduct cases. "Alessandra, thank you for coming," Patricia said, her expression grave. "We are conducting an investigation into potential misconduct involving your husband and Sloan Whitmore. I realize this puts you in a difficult position both personally and professionally, but we need to ask you some questions." "Of course. Whatever I can do to help." Alessandra sat down, her hands folded calmly in her lap despite her racing pulse. Patricia opened a folder containing documents that looked painfully familiar. Expense reports, building entry logs, interview notes. "We received a formal complaint from Fletcher Whitmore, Sloan's husband, alleging that his wife has been conducting an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate employee and fraudulently charging personal expenses to the company." He provided substantial documentation supporting these allegations. "During our investigation, we have uncovered additional evidence that corroborates his claims." She slid several photographs across the table. Screenshots from security footage, time-stamped and clear. Brennan and Sloan entering the conference room at the holiday party. Brennan and Sloan having lunch together at an upscale restaurant. Brennan and Sloan in what appeared to be the lobby of the hotel in Chicago, standing close together in a way that suggested intimacy rather than professional courtesy. "We need to ask you directly, Alessandra, were you aware of any inappropriate relationship between your husband and Sloan Whitmore?" Alessandra looked at the photographs, allowing appropriate shock and pain to show on her face. It was not difficult to access those emotions. They were always there, just beneath the surface, waiting. I suspected something after the holiday party. My husband disappeared for approximately 20 minutes, and when I found him, his appearance was disheveled, and he smelled of perfume that was not mine. Sloane appeared shortly after from the same direction and claimed they had been helping with her car battery in the parking garage, but I did not believe the story. It did not feel right. Patricia nodded sympathetically. Did you investigate your suspicions? I did. A security guard I have known for years contacted me the day after the party and showed me footage that proved the car story was a lie. They had been in a conference room together, not any parking garage. After that, I began documenting what I could access, building entry logs showing they had been meeting on Sunday mornings for 3 months, text messages that seemed innocent on the surface but took on different meaning with context. I was trying to understand the full scope of what had been happening before deciding how to address it. Did you share your findings with anyone? Patricia asked. Yes. I contacted Fletcher Whitmore because I thought he deserved to know the truth about his marriage, just as I deserved to know the truth about mine. I provided him with copies of everything I had discovered. I assumed he would decide what to do with that information, whether to file for divorce privately or take other action. I did not know he would bring it to the company, though in retrospect, I probably should have anticipated that given the fraudulent expense reports and the professional misconduct involved. Patricia closed the folder, her expression a mix of sympathy and professional distance. Alessandra, I want you to know that the company takes these allegations very seriously. Romantic relationships between supervisors and subordinates are strictly prohibited due to the power imbalance and potential for abuse. Add in the fraudulent expense reports, the use of company resources for personal purposes, and the potential legal liability, and we have a situation that requires immediate action. I know this is painful for you personally, but from a professional standpoint, you did the right thing by documenting what you found and ensuring the appropriate people were informed. What happens now? Alessandra asked quietly. The investigation will conclude within the next 48 hours. Both Brennan and Sloane will be interviewed again with legal counsel present. They will be given the opportunity to respond to the allegations and evidence. Based on what we have already uncovered, the likely outcome is termination for both of them, though Sloane's situation is more severe given her position of authority. We may also pursue recovery of the fraudulently claimed expenses, potentially through legal action if they do not reimburse voluntarily. Alessandra absorbed this, feeling a complicated mix of satisfaction and grief. Justice was being served, consequences were arriving, but it came at the cost of acknowledging publicly that her marriage had failed, that her husband had betrayed her in the most fundamental way possible. That evening, Brennan came home late, his face haggard with stress and fear. He had been in meetings all day, interviews with HR and legal, confrontations with evidence he could no longer deny or explain away. When he walked through the door, he looked at Alessandra with an expression that mixed guilt, anger, and desperation. They know, he said simply, his voice hoarse. They have everything. Security footage, expense reports, testimony from Fletcher Whitmore. They know about me and Sloane, know about the Sunday mornings, know about everything. I know they know, Alessandra said calmly. HR interviewed me today as well, asked me what I knew, and when I knew it. Brennan's face crumbled, the mask of innocence finally shattering completely. Alessandra, I am so sorry. I never meant for this to happen, never meant to hurt you. It started, and then it kept going, and I did not know how to stop it. How long? She asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions beneath. How long has it actually been going on? I know about the past 3 months, but was there more before that? He hesitated, clearly debating whether continued lying served any purpose. Finally, he shook his head. 3 months. It started in September after a late meeting. We were working on the Henderson account, and things just happened. I swear it was not planned, was not intentional at the beginning, but then it became regular, became something we both wanted, and I could not seem to stop myself even though I knew it was wrong. 3 months, just as the evidence had shown. No longer, but certainly no shorter either. 3 months of deliberate, systematic betrayal, and he still framed it as something that just happened, as though he had no agency, no choice, no control over his own actions. "I loved you," Alessandra said quietly, using past tense deliberately. "I trusted you completely. I built my life around believing you were honest and faithful and decent, and you destroyed that. Not in a moment of weakness, not in one mistake, but in 100 deliberate choices over 3 months. Every Sunday morning you lied to me. Every time you submitted fraudulent expenses. Every time you text messaged her using work as code. Every single time you chose betrayal. I know, and I hate myself for it." Brennan moved toward her, hands reaching out, but Alessandra stepped back, maintaining distance. "Is there any way, any possibility that we could try to work through this? Go to counseling. Rebuild trust. I know it would take time. I know you have every right to be angry, but I love you, Alessandra. I do not want to lose you." She looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing but cold clarity. "You already lost me. You lost me the moment you walked into that conference room with Sloan. You lost me with every lie you told afterward. The marriage we had is dead, Brennan. It died 3 months ago. I just did not know it yet." His face crumpled further, tears beginning to track down his cheeks. "What happens now? Now you pack some things and find somewhere else to stay. I am filing for divorce. Given the adultery and the documented evidence, I doubt your lawyer will advise you to contest it. We will divide assets according to what is fair. And then we will both move forward with separate lives. And work? What about Morrison and Klein? From what HR told me today, you and Sloan will likely both be terminated within the next 48 hours once the investigation concludes. Sloan will probably be forced to resign to avoid being fired for cause. You might be given the same option, though given her position of authority, her consequences will be more severe. Alessandra felt no satisfaction in delivering this information, only tired resignation. You should start looking for new employment, and you should be prepared for Fletcher to file for divorce as well. I imagine Sloan's life is unraveling in much the same way right now. Brennan stood in the middle of their living room, the room where they had spent countless evenings together, where they had celebrated anniversaries and holidays, where they had built the comfortable intimacy of long marriage, and he looked lost, broken. A man watching the consequences of his choices destroy everything he had taken for granted. "I will pack tonight and stay at a hotel," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I will contact a lawyer tomorrow about the divorce. And Alessandra, for whatever it is worth, I truly am sorry. I know that does not fix anything, does not undo what I did, but I want you to know that I never stopped caring about you, never wanted it to end like this." She did not respond to that, because there was nothing to say that would not be either cruel or dishonest. She simply watched as he went upstairs to pack, listened to the sounds of drawers opening and closing, of hangers sliding on racks, of a life being hastily dismantled and boxed up. An hour later, Brennan descended the stairs with 2 suitcases and a garment bag, everything he needed for immediate survival, packed into containers small enough to carry. He paused at the front door, looking back at her one last time, his face a mask of regret and pain. "Goodbye, Alessandra. Goodbye, Brennan." The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded far more final than any slamming ever could. Alessandra stood alone in the house they had shared, surrounded by the artifacts of their marriage, and felt the full weight of everything finally settling onto her shoulders. The anger that had sustained her through investigation and confrontation began giving way to grief, to the devastating loss of the life she had believed in, the future she had imagined. She walked slowly through the first floor, looking at everything with new eyes. The couch they had picked out together, the art on the walls, the dishes in the kitchen. Every object held memories, good memories of genuine happiness, before everything had been contaminated by betrayal. Were those memories real, or had they always been illusions, her loving a version of Brennan that never truly existed? That night, Alessandra slept alone in their bed for the first time in 10 years, the empty space beside her feeling vast and cold. She did not cry. The tears would come later, she knew, in waves and storms once the shock wore off. But tonight, she felt only numbness, a protective barrier her mind had erected against the full emotional impact. Tomorrow would bring more consequences, more unraveling, more public exposure of private pain. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of her bedroom, Alessandra simply breathed, simply existed, simply survived one moment at a time until morning came and brought with it whatever new challenges awaited. The next morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through curtains Alessandra had forgotten to close. She woke disoriented, her hand reaching automatically across the bed before her conscious mind remembered that Brennan was gone, that the space beside her would remain empty from now on. The house felt different in the morning silence, larger somehow, as though the absence of one person had expanded the physical space while simultaneously making it feel more hollow. She forced herself through the morning routine, coffee and shower and professional clothes, armor for whatever this day would bring. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from her mother and 2 text messages from colleagues at work, carefully worded inquiries about whether she was okay, whether the rumors circulating were true. News traveled fast in corporate environments, and apparently the investigation had become common knowledge despite HR's attempts at discretion. Alessandra arrived at Morrison & Klein at 8:15, earlier than usual, but not suspiciously so. The office buzzed with subdued energy, people clustering in small groups near the coffee station and photocopiers, conversations stopping abruptly when she passed. She kept her head high, her expression neutral, refusing to show the emotional devastation churning beneath her professional facade. They could know about the investigation, about the affair, about her failing marriage, but they would not see her broken by it. At 9:30, Patricia Reynolds from HR appeared at her desk, her expression carefully sympathetic. "Alessandra, could you come to my office, please? There are some updates I need to share with you regarding the investigation." They walked together to Patricia's office on the 12th floor, past more clusters of whispering colleagues, past conference rooms where Alessandra imagined similar conversations were happening with Brennan and Sloan in separate locations. Patricia closed the door and gestured for Alessandra to sit. "The investigation concluded this morning," Patricia began, her hands folded on her desk in a posture of professional formality, softened slightly by genuine concern. Both Brennan Hartwell and Sloan Whitmore were interviewed extensively yesterday afternoon with legal representation present. They were confronted with all evidence we had gathered, including security footage, building entry logs, expense reports, and testimony from multiple witnesses. After consulting with their attorneys, both ultimately admitted to the inappropriate relationship and acknowledged the improper use of company resources. Alessandra nodded, absorbing this information with outward calm, while internally noting the word ultimately, which suggested they had not immediately confessed, had likely tried to minimize or explain away the evidence before finally accepting that denial was futile. Given the severity of the misconduct, particularly Sloan's abuse of her position of authority over a subordinate employee, the company has made the following decisions. Patricia pulled out a document, official letterhead visible at the top. Sloan Whitmore has been given the option to resign effective immediately with a neutral reference, or be terminated for cause, with documentation of the reasons permanently recorded in her employment file. She has chosen to resign. Her resignation was submitted this morning at 8 o'clock. She has been escorted from the building, and her access to all company systems has been revoked. Something cold and satisfied settled in Alessandra's chest. Sloan was gone, forced out. Her career at Morrison & Klein ended in disgrace. The woman who had helped destroy her marriage was facing real consequences, immediate and devastating. Brennan's situation is slightly different, Patricia continued. Because he was the subordinate in the relationship, the power dynamic is considered less egregious from a corporate policy standpoint. However, the fraudulent expense reports and knowing participation in the inappropriate relationship still constitute serious misconduct. He has been offered a transfer to our regional office in Phoenix, Arizona, approximately 2,500 kilometers from here. The transfer would be effective in 2 weeks, with relocation assistance provided. If he declines the transfer, his employment will be terminated. Phoenix, across the country. Far enough to remove him from the immediate scandal, from the daily reminder of his choices, but also far enough to make maintaining any semblance of their marriage logistically impossible. Not that Alessandra had any intention of trying. Brennan has accepted the transfer, Patricia said. He will work remotely for the next 2 weeks during the transition period, then relocate to Phoenix on January 6th. This minimizes disruption to current projects and allows for proper handoff of his responsibilities. Alessandra processed this, recognizing the corporate strategy. Brennan was being removed from the situation, but not fired outright, preserving the company's ability to claim they had handled the matter appropriately while avoiding potential wrongful termination claims. And Brennan had chosen the transfer over unemployment, probably calculating that having a job, any job, even one requiring cross-country relocation, was better than trying to find new employment with this scandal trailing him. There is one additional matter, Patricia said, her tone shifting slightly. Fletcher Whitmore has requested that the company pursue reimbursement for all fraudulent expense claims submitted by both parties. The accounting department has calculated the total at approximately $15,800 over 3 months. The company will be demanding full repayment from both Brennan and Sloan within 90 days, with legal action threatened if they do not comply. $15,800. The price tag on their affair, the quantifiable cost of their betrayal measured in falsified receipts and stolen company resources. It seemed both substantial and somehow inadequate, numbers on a page failing to capture the true destruction they had caused. "How are you holding up?" Patricia asked, her professional demeanor softening into something more human. "I realize this is extraordinarily difficult for you personally, even as the company works through the professional implications." "I am managing," Alessandra said carefully. "It helps that I found out before the investigation started, so I have had some time to process the reality of the situation. And it helps knowing that there are consequences, that what they did is being taken seriously rather than swept under the rug or minimized." Patricia nodded understanding. "For what it is worth, the senior partners have been impressed with how you have handled this situation. You documented evidence professionally, brought it to appropriate attention, and maintained your composure throughout a personally devastating revelation. That takes strength and integrity. Once the immediate crisis passes and things settle, I would not be surprised if opportunities open up for you here. The company values employees who demonstrate that kind of character under pressure." Alessandra thanked her and returned to her desk, where she spent the rest of the day attempting to focus on work, while her mind spun through the implications of everything she had learned. Sloan was gone, forced out in disgrace. Brennan was being shipped across the country, exiled from the scene of his misconduct. Both were facing significant financial penalties for their fraudulent expenses. The corporate consequences were swift and substantial. But what about the personal consequences? What happened to their marriages, their families, their lives beyond the walls of Morrison & Klein? That evening, Alessandra's phone rang with a number she recognized. Fletcher Whitmore. Mrs. Hartwell, I wanted to update you on developments from my end. Fletcher's voice carried the same controlled intensity she remembered from their meeting, but now with an additional edge of grim satisfaction. I filed for divorce this morning. My attorney has prepared a comprehensive petition citing adultery, breach of marital contract, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Given the documented evidence and Sloane's admission of the affair to her employer, my attorney is confident we will obtain favorable terms regarding asset division and custody arrangements. I am filing for divorce as well, Alessandra said. My attorney is preparing the paperwork now. With the documented adultery and Brennan's admission to the company, there is little he can contest. Good. They both need to understand that actions have consequences that extend far beyond their employment status. Fletcher paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried weight that suggested careful thought. I wanted you to know that I have also filed a formal complaint with Morrison & Klein's board of directors regarding the inadequate oversight that allowed this situation to develop. A director conducting an affair with a subordinate for 3 months without detection suggests serious failures in management and HR protocols. I have requested a full review of the company's policies and enforcement mechanisms. Alessandra felt a surge of respect for Fletcher's thoroughness. He was not simply addressing his personal situation, he was systematically dismantling every structure that had enabled or failed to prevent the affair. Sloane's career, her marriage, and now potentially her professional reputation more broadly, were all under coordinated attack. Additionally, Fletcher continued, I have contacted the spouses of 2 other senior employees whom I have reason to believe Sloane may have had inappropriate relationships with in the past. Nothing confirmed, but enough rumors and circumstantial evidence to warrant investigation. If there is a pattern of behavior here, if my wife has done this before with other subordinates, that information needs to come to light. You are very thorough, Alessandra observed. I am a litigator specializing in employment law and corporate misconduct. This is what I do professionally, and now I am applying those same skills to my personal situation. Fletcher's voice carried cold determination. Sloane has spent 14 years presenting herself as a devoted wife and mother, while apparently conducting herself very differently in her professional life. I intend to ensure that everyone who needs to know the truth has access to it. Not out of vengeance, though I will not pretend I do not want her to suffer consequences, but because patterns of behavior matter, because abuse of power matters, and because the next person she works for deserves to know what kind of employee they are hiring. They spoke for a few more minutes, coordinating their divorce proceedings to ensure neither interfered with the other's case, sharing attorney contact information, establishing an alliance born of shared injury. When the call ended, Alessandra felt something she had not experienced in days. Hope, not for reconciliation or restoration of what had been lost, but hope that justice would be served, that the people who had betrayed them would face appropriate consequences for their choices. Over the following days, the dominoes continued to fall with satisfying regularity. Brennan moved his belongings out of their house over the course of 3 trips, each one supervised by Alessandra, to ensure nothing was taken that was not clearly his personal property. They spoke minimally during these exchanges, their conversations limited to logistics and division of possessions. He looked progressively worse each time she saw him. Dark circles under his eyes, weight dropping from his frame, the physical manifestation of stress and guilt and fear about his uncertain future. Sloane's situation deteriorated even faster. Fletcher's divorce petition became public record, and within days the local legal community was buzzing with details of her misconduct. Job interviews she had scheduled with other firms were suddenly canceled without explanation. Professional references she had counted on became unavailable or declined to provide recommendations. The network she had built over years in the industry seemed to evaporate overnight as word spread about the circumstances of her departure from Morrison and Klein. 2 weeks after the investigation concluded, Fletcher called Alessandra again, with an update that carried grim satisfaction. "You were right to suspect this was not Sloane's first affair," he said without preamble. "I have now spoken with 3 other men whose wives work or worked at Morrison and Klein, who confirmed they suspected inappropriate relationships between their wives and Sloane over the past 8 years. None could prove it definitively at the time, so they handled it privately through marriage counseling or, in 2 cases, divorce. But the pattern is clear. Sloane has been using her position of authority to conduct affairs with subordinates for nearly a decade." Alessandra absorbed this revelation, feeling sick at the implications. 8 years, multiple people, and no one reported it? The men I spoke to were focused on their own marriages, their own situations. They did not think about the broader pattern or the abuse of corporate power. They just wanted to deal with their personal pain and move on. Fletcher's voice carried frustration. But now, with multiple witnesses willing to provide testimony about Sloane's pattern of behavior, I have approached Morrison and Klein's board of directors with a demand for a comprehensive external investigation into how this conduct was allowed to continue for so long without detection or consequence. "Will they do it?" Alessandra asked. "They do not have much choice. I have made it clear that if they decline, I will take the information to the media, to regulatory bodies, to every outlet that might be interested in a story about systematic sexual misconduct at a major financial services firm being ignored by senior management. The potential liability and reputational damage are too significant for them to refuse." The external investigation launched 1 week later, conducted by a prestigious law firm specializing in corporate misconduct cases. Over the course of 6 weeks, investigators interviewed dozens of current and former employees, reviewed years of security footage and entry logs, analyzed expense reports and communication records. The findings, when finally compiled into a report presented to the board of directors, were damning. Sloane Whitmore had conducted at least 4 separate affairs with subordinate employees over an 8-year period. She had systematically abused her position of authority, using promises of promotions and favorable assignments to initiate relationships, then using threats of negative performance reviews or career damage to maintain silence when the relationships ended. She had submitted over $70,000 in fraudulent expense claims during that time period, using company resources to fund her various affairs. And she had created a hostile work environment that had driven multiple talented employees to leave the company rather than continue working under her supervision. The report recommended termination for 2 other senior managers who had been aware of rumors about Sloane's conduct but had failed to report it or investigate properly. It recommended sweeping changes to HR policies and oversight mechanisms, and it recommended that the company consider whether to pursue criminal charges for the fraudulent expense claims, given the substantial amounts involved. By the time the investigation concluded, it was late January. Alessandra had been living alone for over a month, her divorce proceedings moving forward with clinical efficiency. Brennan was in Phoenix, struggling to establish himself in a new city where he knew no one, and working with colleagues who had heard whispers about why he had been transferred. Their asset division was being negotiated through attorneys, numbers and properties reduced to line items on legal documents. The house, appraised at $580,000, would go to Alessandra. Brennan would receive other assets to balance the division, but the home where they had built their marriage would be hers alone. She planned to sell it eventually, but not immediately. First, she needed to exorcise the ghosts, to reclaim the space and transform it from shrine to a dead marriage into simply a place where she lived. The vehicles were split equitably, Alessandra keeping the newer SUV valued at $45,000, Brennan taking the older sedan. Their joint savings account, containing $140,000 accumulated over 10 years of dual incomes and careful financial planning, was divided, with Alessandra receiving $95,000 and Brennan $45,000. The disparity reflecting both his adultery and his responsibility for the fraudulent expenses he was required to repay. The divorce itself was finalized on February 28th, exactly 3 months and 2 weeks after the company holiday party that had been the catalyst for everything. Alessandra sat in the courtroom with her attorney, listened to the judge review the settlement agreement, and felt surprisingly little emotion when the gavel came down and her marriage was legally dissolved. The real ending had happened months ago, in a hotel corridor where she had smelled perfume and seen lies in her husband's eyes. This was just paperwork, official recognition of a death that had already occurred. Sloane's divorce took slightly longer due to complications involving custody arrangements for their 2 children and disputes over asset division. But it followed a similar trajectory. Fletcher's documented evidence of adultery and professional misconduct gave him substantial leverage, and Sloane ultimately settled for terms far less favorable than she would have received in an amicable dissolution. She received minimal spousal support, only what was legally required given the length of the marriage, and Fletcher secured primary custody of their children, with Sloane getting limited visitation rights. The financial penalties were particularly devastating for Sloane. She was required to repay Morrison and Klein not just the $15,800 from the affair with Brennan, but an additional $54,200 identified by the external investigation as fraudulent claims from her previous affairs. $70,000 total, due within 6 months, with legal action promised if she defaulted. Combined with the unfavorable divorce settlement and her inability to secure new employment at a comparable salary level, Sloane's financial situation deteriorated rapidly from comfortable upper-middle-class stability to genuine hardship. Alessandra learned these details from Fletcher, who maintained regular contact throughout the divorce proceedings, their alliance of betrayed spouses evolving into something resembling friendship, built on shared experience and mutual understanding. They met for coffee occasionally, comparing notes on their separate healing processes, discussing the challenges of rebuilding lives that had been so thoroughly dismantled. "Sloane is working as a consultant now," Fletcher told her during one such meeting in early March, making maybe a third of what she earned as a director at Morrison and Klein. "She had to sell the house we lived in for 14 years to cover the expense reimbursement penalties and legal fees. She is renting a small apartment across town, working contract jobs that barely cover her expenses, and trying to maintain some relationship with the children despite the custody arrangement. Everything she built professionally is gone. Everything she had personally is destroyed. And it is entirely the result of her own choices. Do you feel satisfied by that?" Alessandra asked, genuinely curious. Seeing her suffer consequences? Fletcher considered the question carefully. "Satisfied is the wrong word. I do not take pleasure in her suffering, but I feel that justice has been served, that the natural consequences of her actions have arrived as they should. She abused her power, betrayed her marriage, stole from her employer, and created misery for multiple people over many years. That she now faces significant hardship as a result seems appropriate, proportional, not satisfying exactly, but correct." Alessandra nodded, understanding. She felt similarly about Brennan's situation. He was struggling in Phoenix, isolated and overwhelmed, working long hours to try to establish himself while simultaneously dealing with divorce proceedings and financial penalties. His social media posts, which she occasionally checked despite knowing it was probably unhealthy, showed a man trying to present a positive face while clearly drowning beneath the surface. New city adventures that looked forced and lonely. Workplace photos with colleagues he barely knew. Inspirational quotes about resilience and moving forward that rang hollow given the circumstances. She did not take pleasure in his obvious unhappiness, but neither did she feel particularly sorry for him. He had made his choices, maintained his deceptions, and was now experiencing the natural results. That seemed fair, balanced, just. By late March, 3.5 months after the holiday party, Alessandra's life had stabilized into a new normal. She still lived in the house she had shared with Brennan, though she had redecorated extensively, removing or replacing items too saturated with memories. The bedroom furniture was entirely new, purchased specifically to avoid sleeping in the bed they had shared. The living room art had been changed, photographs removed or replaced with landscapes and abstracts that carried no emotional weight. Professionally, things had improved significantly. True to Patricia's prediction, opportunities had opened up following the scandal. In mid-March, Alessandra was offered a promotion to senior management, a position that came with a corner office on the 16th floor, a salary increase of $35,000 annually, and responsibility for a larger team and more significant projects. The company, eager to demonstrate that employees who handled difficult situations with integrity were valued and rewarded, had fast-tracked her advancement. The new office had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a view that Alessandra found herself appreciating more than she had anticipated. She could see for miles, the urban landscape spreading out in all directions, and something about that perspective felt metaphorical. Distance from the immediate crisis, ability to see patterns and connections that were invisible when you were too close to the situation. She sold the old house in early April, accepting an offer that was slightly below asking price, but came from buyers who loved the property and seemed likely to fill it with happier memories than the ones Alessandra was leaving behind. With the proceeds from the sale, combined with her share of the divorce settlement and increased salary, she purchased a modern apartment in a newer development downtown, 32 floors up with panoramic views and no ghosts haunting the corners. The move felt symbolic, deliberate shedding of the past and conscious construction of a future that belonged entirely to her. She furnished the apartment with pieces she chose alone, in styles that reflected her preferences without compromise or negotiation. She painted walls in colors Brennan would have vetoed. She created spaces that were entirely hers, rooms where no one else's preferences or presence diluted her ownership, and slowly, incrementally, she began to heal. Not in the sense of returning to who she had been before the betrayal. That person no longer existed, and never would again. But healing in the sense of constructing a new self from the broken pieces. Someone stronger and more cautious, but also more authentic, no longer performing the role of devoted wife for someone who did not deserve that devotion. She started therapy, weekly sessions with a counselor who specialized in trauma and betrayal, working through the complicated layers of anger and grief and damaged trust. She reconnected with friends she had neglected during her marriage, social relationships that had atrophied when so much of her emotional energy had been devoted to Brennan. She took up hobbies she had abandoned years ago, painting and hiking and reading for pleasure rather than professional development. And gradually, very gradually, the wound began to close, scar tissue forming over the raw places where trust and love had been violently removed. She would always carry the scar, always bear the mark of what had been done to her. But scars were proof of survival, evidence that damage had been sustained and overcome rather than defeated by. On a Saturday afternoon in early May, almost 6 months after the holiday party, Alessandra was grocery shopping near her new apartment, selecting organic produce and specialty items she had discovered she enjoyed now that she was cooking only for herself and could indulge preferences without accommodation. The store was busy with weekend shoppers, the atmosphere relaxed and pleasant, spring sunlight streaming through the tall windows. She was examining apples, weighing them in her palm and checking for firmness when she sensed someone watching her. The feeling was subtle but unmistakable, that primitive awareness of being observed. She looked up and across 2 aisles, and her heart stuttered in her chest. Brennan stood near the prepared foods section, frozen in place, a shopping basket hanging from his hand containing just a few basic items. He looked terrible, thinner than she had ever seen him, his face gaunt and shadowed with exhaustion that no amount of sleep could remedy. His clothes hung loosely, inexpensive and worn, nothing like the careful professional wardrobe he had maintained during their marriage. His hair needed cutting, his posture suggested defeat, and his eyes, when they met hers, held such profound misery that Alessandra felt an unexpected flash of something that might have been pity. But the pity was brief and ultimately irrelevant. He had destroyed their marriage through systematic betrayal. He had lied to her face for 3 months. He had used her trust as cover for his affair. Whatever suffering he experienced now was the direct result of choices he had made, consequences he had earned. Their eyes locked across the grocery store, and Alessandra saw his mouth open as though he might speak, might try to cross the distance between them and attempt some kind of conversation or apology or explanation. For a moment, everything seemed suspended, the normal noise and movement of the store fading into background static, while they stared at each other across produce displays and shopping carts. And then Alessandra did something that felt more powerful than any confrontation, any angry speech, any dramatic gesture of contempt. She calmly placed the apple she had been examining into her cart, turned away, and walked in the opposite direction without a single word, without acknowledgement, without any indication that seeing him had affected her in any meaningful way. She did not look back, did not slow her pace or hesitate, simply moved through the store, completing her shopping as though nothing unusual had occurred, as though she had not just seen the man she had been married to for 10 years, looking broken and desperate in the prepared foods aisle, because that was the truth, the fundamental reality she had finally, completely accepted. Brennan was no longer her concern, no longer her responsibility, no longer someone whose emotional state or physical well-being had any claim on her attention or energy. He was a stranger, someone she had once thought she knew, but who had revealed himself to be entirely different from who she had believed him to be. He was irrelevant. Alessandra completed her shopping with deliberate calm, moving through the aisles, selecting items she needed, refusing to let Brennan's presence alter her routine or disturb her carefully reconstructed peace. She paid for her groceries, loaded them into reusable bags, and walked to her car in the parking lot, her spine straight and her head held high. Only when she was safely inside her vehicle with the door closed did she allow herself to acknowledge the rapid beating of her heart, the slight tremor in her hands as they gripped the steering wheel. Seeing him had been a shock despite the months of separation, despite the finalized divorce, despite everything that had happened. Some part of her brain still associated his face with safety and partnership and home, muscle memory from 10 years of conditioning that had not yet fully absorbed the new reality. But even as her body processed the unexpected encounter, her mind remained clear and certain. She had made the right choice, walking away without speaking. He deserved nothing from her, not even acknowledgement, not even anger, just the cold reality of complete irrelevance. She drove back to her apartment, carried the groceries up 32 floors in the elevator, and unpacked everything in her kitchen with its sleek countertops and modern appliances, everything chosen by her alone for her own preferences. The sun was beginning to set, painting the city in shades of gold and amber, and Alessandra stood at her floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the light change, feeling something shift inside her chest. For months, she had been moving through the mechanics of healing, following the steps therapists and self-help books recommended, doing everything right according to external guidance. But in that moment, watching the sunset from her own apartment that held no memories of betrayal, having just walked past her ex-husband without giving him the power of her attention, Alessandra realized she had crossed some invisible threshold. She was not just surviving the end of her marriage. She was actively building something new, something that belonged entirely to her. The realization brought unexpected tears, not of sadness, but of relief, of release, of recognizing that she had carried herself through the worst of it and emerged on the other side, fundamentally intact. Damaged, yes. Changed, absolutely. But not destroyed, not defeated, not diminished in the ways that truly mattered. Her phone buzzed with a text message, pulling her attention from the window. It was from Iris Callahan, the security guard whose courage in showing her the truth had been the catalyst for everything that followed. "Mrs. Hartwell, I hope you do not mind me reaching out. I wanted to check on how you are doing. I have been thinking about you often and hoping you are finding your way through this difficult time. You are stronger than you know." Iris. Alessandra smiled, touched by the unexpected kindness from someone who had no obligation to care, but chose to anyway. She typed a response. "Thank you so much for checking in, Iris. I am doing well, all things considered. What you did for me that day, showing me the truth, even though it was painful, was one of the greatest acts of kindness anyone has ever done for me. I will always be grateful for your courage and compassion. I hope you are doing well too, Alessandra." The response came quickly. "I am glad to hear you are finding your way forward. You deserve to know the truth, and you handled everything with such grace and strength. If you ever need anything, even just someone to talk to, please do not hesitate to reach out. You have my number now. Take care of yourself." Alessandra set down her phone, feeling warmth spread through her chest. Kindness from unexpected sources, connections formed through shared humanity rather than obligation. People who chose to care simply because caring mattered. These were the things that sustained someone through crisis, that reminded her the world contained decency, even when those closest to her had demonstrated its opposite. Over the following weeks, life continued its forward momentum. Alessandra settled further into her new role at Morrison & Klein, building a reputation as a talented manager who combined strategic thinking with genuine care for her team members. The promotion had not just been corporate politics or damage control she was discovering. She was actually good at this, at leadership and vision, and creating environments where people could do their best work. The betrayal had not destroyed her professionally. If anything, the experience had sharpened certain skills. Her ability to read people, to detect inconsistencies, to trust her instincts when something felt wrong. In mid-May, Patricia Reynolds from HR stopped by Alessandra's new office, carrying a folder and wearing an expression that mixed professional formality with something that looked like satisfaction. "Do you have a few minutes?" Patricia asked from the doorway. "Of course, come in." Alessandra gestured to the chairs across from her desk, the furniture still new enough to smell faintly of leather and possibility. Patricia sat down and opened the folder, revealing documents with official letterhead. "I wanted to give you a final update on the investigation and its aftermath, since you were so central to bringing the misconduct to light. The Board of Directors has implemented all recommendations from the external review. New policies on workplace relationships, enhanced oversight mechanisms, mandatory training for all management-level employees on abuse of power and appropriate professional boundaries. The company is taking this seriously, making real structural changes to prevent similar situations in the future." "That is good to hear," Alessandra said, meaning it. If some positive change could emerge from all the destruction, if other employees might be protected from similar abuse because of what had happened, then perhaps the pain had served some larger purpose. "There is something else," Patricia continued, her expression shifting to something more personal. "You should know that Sloan Whitmore attempted to apply for a position at 3 different firms in our industry over the past 2 months. All 3 contacted us for references or to verify her employment history. In each case, we provided factual information about the circumstances of her resignation, the investigation findings, and the pattern of misconduct documented over 8 years. None of the firms extended offers after receiving that information. Alessandra absorbed this, recognizing the implications. Sloane's career in this industry was effectively over. No reputable firm would hire someone with her documented history of abuse of power and fraudulent conduct, not when litigation-conscious companies could barely afford the liability. She would have to start over in a completely different field, at entry-level positions far below what she had achieved through years of climbing the corporate ladder, or she would have to leave the professional world entirely. Additionally, Patricia said, her voice taking on a harder edge, we received information 3 days ago that Sloane defaulted on the repayment agreement for the fraudulent expenses. She was supposed to make monthly payments toward the $70,000 total, but she missed the first 2 payments entirely. The company's legal department has initiated collection proceedings, which will likely result in wage garnishment if she obtains any employment, and potentially a civil judgment that will impact her credit and financial stability for years. The consequences continued to compound, layer upon layer of natural results from choices Sloane had made. Alessandra felt no particular satisfaction in hearing about the woman's ongoing struggles, but she did feel a sense of justice being served, of the universe restoring balance in its own methodical way. "How is Brennan doing?" Patricia asked carefully. "I realize you are divorced now, but I thought you might want to know his status with the company." "I am curious, yes," Alessandra admitted, "though whatever happens with him is his own responsibility to manage." "He has been struggling in Phoenix," Patricia said bluntly. "Performance reviews have been mediocre at best. He seems isolated, unmotivated, unable to connect with colleagues or clients effectively. His supervisor has expressed concerns about whether the transfer was successful or whether we simply relocated a problem rather than solving it. There is talk of putting him on a performance improvement plan, which typically precedes termination if the employee does not show significant and sustained improvement. So Brennan was failing in Phoenix, unable to establish himself professionally or personally in his new environment, drowning beneath the weight of consequences he could not escape no matter how many kilometers he put between himself and the scene of his choices. Alessandra felt a complicated mix of emotions hearing this: sadness for the waste of potential, relief that she was not responsible for managing or supporting his struggles, and a distant echo of pity for someone who had destroyed his own life so thoroughly. "Thank you for the update," Alessandra said. "I appreciate you keeping me informed, even though I am no longer directly connected to any of these situations." Patricia stood to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it is worth, Alessandra, you are an example to a lot of people in this company. The way you handled an impossible situation, the integrity you demonstrated, the strength you showed in rebuilding your life afterward, it has not gone unnoticed. You should be proud of yourself." After Patricia left, Alessandra sat alone in her office, looking out at the city skyline and thinking about the past 6 months. The holiday party in December that had seemed like just another corporate obligation, the 20 minutes that had destroyed her understanding of reality, the security footage that had confirmed her worst suspicions, the investigation and divorce and systematic dismantling of the life she thought she had built, the grief and anger and slow, painful reconstruction of selfhood. It had been the worst period of her life, without question, but it had also been transformative in ways she was only beginning to fully appreciate. She had discovered reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. She had learned to trust her instincts, to act decisively when action was required, to demand justice rather than accepting whatever she was given. She had learned that betrayal said everything about the betrayer, and nothing about her own worth or value. And she had learned, perhaps most importantly, that she was capable of surviving the loss of what she had believed was fundamental to her identity, and emerging on the other side as someone stronger, clearer, more authentically herself than she had been before. On a Monday morning in late May, Alessandra arrived at her office to find an unexpected visitor waiting. Iris Callahan sat in the small seating area outside the elevator banks, wearing civilian clothes rather than her security uniform, her weathered face lighting up when she saw Alessandra approach. "Iris, what a wonderful surprise. What brings you here?" Alessandra embraced the older woman warmly, genuinely delighted to see her. "I retired last week," Iris explained, her smile proud and slightly emotional. "After 15 years of night shifts and weekend work, I finally decided it was time to spend more time with my grandchildren, travel a bit, enjoy life while I still can. But before I left completely, I wanted to come see you one more time, see how you were doing in person, rather than just texting." They went to a nearby cafe, the same one where Alessandra had met Fletcher Whitmore 6 months earlier, and talked over coffee about everything that had happened since that pivotal morning when Iris had shown her the security footage. Alessandra filled her in on the investigation results, the divorces, the promotions and new apartment, the slow process of rebuilding a life from ruins. "I am so proud of you," Iris said, reaching across the table to squeeze Alessandra's hand. "I have seen a lot of people go through betrayal and heartbreak in my years working security, watching people's lives play out in little moments caught on camera. Some people let it break them completely, turn bitter and small and defeated. But you did not do that. You faced the truth, demanded justice, and then built yourself something new and better. That takes real courage, real strength of character. I could not have done it without you," Alessandra said honestly. "If you had not shown me that footage, if you had decided it was not your place to get involved, I might still be living in ignorance, still believing lies, still wasting my life on someone who did not deserve it. You gave me the gift of truth, even though you knew it would hurt. That is one of the most valuable things anyone has ever done for me." They talked for over an hour, two women from very different backgrounds and life circumstances, connected by a moment of courage and kindness that had changed everything. When they finally parted with promises to stay in touch and plans to meet for lunch in a few weeks, Alessandra felt grateful for the reminder that goodness existed in the world, that people could choose compassion over convenience, that connections formed in crisis could evolve into genuine friendship. Summer arrived with warm sunshine and longer days, and Alessandra found herself genuinely enjoying her life in ways she had not experienced in years. She dated occasionally, cautious but open to the possibility of eventual partnership with someone worthy of trust. She traveled, taking a week-long trip to the Pacific Northwest, to hike and explore and prove to herself that she could navigate the world independently. She invested in friendships, hosted dinner parties in her apartment, joined a book club and a painting class, filled her calendar with activities that brought her joy rather than obligation. And slowly, incrementally, the man she had been married to for 10 years became less central to her internal narrative. Brennan was no longer the primary character in her life story, not the hero she had believed him to be, not even the villain whose betrayal defined her. He was simply someone who had been important once, and no longer was, a chapter that had closed, a lesson learned about trust and discernment, and the difference between who people presented themselves to be and who they actually were. On a Saturday afternoon in early August, 8 months after the holiday party, Alessandra was meeting Fletcher Whitmore for their periodic coffee, a ritual they had maintained since their divorces finalized. Fletcher looked better than he had in months, the lines of stress and anger that had marked his face gradually softening into something more peaceful. "I have news," Fletcher said, as they settled into their usual corner table at the Riverside Cafe. "I am seeing someone. Started dating a colleague from another firm about 6 weeks ago. Nothing serious yet, but it is nice. Feeling like I can trust someone again, feeling like partnership is possible even after everything that happened." "That is wonderful, Fletcher. I am genuinely happy for you." Alessandra meant it completely. If Fletcher could find his way back to trust and connection after what Sloane had done to him, That offered hope that such recovery was possible for everyone. "What about you? Anyone special in your life?" Fletcher asked with friendly curiosity. "Not yet, but I am open to the possibility. I have been on a few dates. Nothing that has developed into anything significant, but I am enjoying the process of getting to know people without the pressure of looking for forever. Just seeing who is out there, what feels right, what does not." Alessandra sipped her coffee, considering her words carefully. "I think I needed this time alone more than I realized. Time to figure out who I am separate from being someone's wife. Time to build a life that is entirely mine rather than shared or negotiated. I am in no rush to give that up, but I am also not closed to the idea of eventually sharing my life with someone who deserves that privilege." "You deserve someone who sees your worth and honors it," Fletcher said firmly. "Someone who would never dream of betraying the trust you give them. Do not settle for anything less than that, no matter how long it takes to find." They talked for another hour, comparing notes on their children. Fletcher's 2 kids were adjusting well to the custody arrangement despite the divorce, while Alessandra reflected on the blessing of not having children with Brennan, sparing any innocent parties from the fallout of adult failures. They discussed work and hobbies and future plans, the conversation of friends rather than co-conspirators in divorce proceedings, proof that relationships formed in crisis could evolve into something healthier and more sustainable. As summer gave way to autumn, Alessandra marked the approaching anniversary of the holiday party with mixed emotions. September bled into October. Then November arrived with its cooling temperatures and earlier darkness. She prepared for the company's annual holiday party, scheduled once again for mid-December at the Grand Meridian Hotel, and discovered she felt no particular dread about attending. It was just a party, just a professional obligation, not the site of trauma, but simply a place where something had happened that led to necessary change. On a Tuesday morning in early December, Alessandra sat in her office reviewing quarterly reports when her assistant buzzed through on the intercom. "Mrs. Hartwell, there is someone here to see you. She does not have an appointment, but she says it is important. Her name is Sloan Whitmore." Alessandra's hand froze on her computer mouse, her breath catching in her throat. "Sloan, here, asking to see her." After everything that had happened, after all the months of silence and distance, the woman who had helped destroy her marriage was standing in the reception area outside her office, requesting an audience. For a long moment, Alessandra considered simply refusing, having her assistant send Sloan away without acknowledgement. But curiosity won out over caution, the desire to understand what could possibly motivate this visit overriding her instinct to avoid confrontation. "Send her in," Alessandra said, keeping her voice level and professional. The door opened and Sloan Whitmore entered, and Alessandra barely recognized her. The polished, confident director she remembered had been replaced by someone who looked worn and defeated. Sloan had lost weight, her clothes hanging loosely on a frame that appeared diminished. Her hair, once styled immaculately, was pulled back in a simple ponytail showing gray roots that needed touching up. She wore minimal makeup, her face showing lines of stress and exhaustion that no cosmetics could fully conceal. Her eyes, when they met Alessandra's, held profound shame and regret. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," Sloan said quietly, her voice lacking any of the authority and confidence it had once carried. "I realize I have no right to ask for your time, no right to be here at all, but I needed to speak with you before I leave." "Leave?" Alessandra kept her tone neutral, revealing nothing of the complicated emotions churning beneath her professional exterior. "I am moving to another state, starting over somewhere with no history, no connections to this industry or this city. Everything here is. It is all destroyed. My career, my marriage, my reputation, my financial stability, my relationship with my children." Sloane's voice cracked slightly, but she maintained composure. "I defaulted on the company repayment agreement because I simply cannot afford it. My wages are being garnished from the contract work I have been doing, and I still cannot keep up with basic expenses and child support obligations. Fletcher has primary custody of our kids, and they barely speak to me when I do see them. They know what I did, what I am, and they are ashamed of me." Alessandra listened without interrupting, watching this woman who had once held significant power, now standing broken in her office, recounting the comprehensive destruction of her own life. "I came here today to tell you that I am sorry," Sloane continued, her eyes filling with tears that she blinked back with visible effort. "I know that does not fix anything, does not undo the damage I caused, but I wanted you to hear it directly from me. What I did was inexcusable. I abused my position, betrayed your trust even though you had never done anything to me, destroyed your marriage for my own selfish gratification. I told myself it was just physical, just a stress release, that it did not mean anything. But that was a lie I used to justify choices I knew were wrong." She paused, swallowing hard. "You deserve better than what Brennan gave you. You deserved a husband who honored his vows, who respected your trust, who saw your value and treated you accordingly. And I took advantage of his weakness and selfishness for my own benefit, without caring at all about the collateral damage. That makes me a terrible person, and I am finally, after all these months of consequences, beginning to understand the full weight of what I did." Alessandra sat quietly, processing this unexpected apology, this admission of guilt and acknowledgement of harm. Part of her wanted to unleash the anger she had carried for months, to itemize every way Sloane's choices had damaged her, to ensure this woman understood completely what she had destroyed. But looking at Sloane now, clearly already destroyed by natural consequences, already living in the ruins she had created, Alessandra found she had no energy for additional punishment. "Thank you for the apology," Alessandra said finally, her voice calm and measured. "I accept it, not because it changes anything or repairs the damage, but because holding on to anger serves no purpose at this point. You have faced consequences for your actions, significant and lasting consequences. So has Brennan. My marriage is over, that chapter of my life is closed, and I have moved forward into something new, and honestly better than what I had before." Sloane nodded, more tears escaping despite her efforts at control. "You are gracious to even listen to me. Most people would have refused to see me at all. I needed you to know that I recognize what I did, that I am not making excuses or minimizing it, and that I am truly sorry for the pain I caused you. I hope you find whatever you are looking for in your fresh start," Alessandra said, meaning it more than she expected. "I hope you learn from this experience and make better choices going forward, not for my sake, but for your own, and for your children, who deserve a mother they can be proud of, rather than ashamed of." Sloane stood to leave, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand in a gesture that looked childlike and vulnerable. "Thank you for your kindness. You are a better person than I deserve to encounter." After Sloane left, Alessandra sat alone in her office, processing the unexpected encounter, the genuine remorse in Sloane's apology, the visible devastation of a life completely unraveled. She felt no triumph in seeing her former rival so thoroughly broken, but she did feel a sense of closure, of completion, as though some circle that had opened the previous December had finally closed. That evening, Alessandra received a text message from an unknown number. She opened it cautiously, her breath catching when she saw who it was from. "Alessandra, I saw Sloane today after she left your office. She told me she apologized to you, that you were kind to her even though she did not deserve it. I wanted to reach out to say something I should have said months ago, but was too ashamed and too cowardly to express directly. I am sorry. I am sorry for betraying you, for lying to you, for destroying what we had built together. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. I hope you have found happiness in your new life, and I hope someday you can forgive me not for my sake, but for yours, so you do not carry the weight of anger and resentment. You are an incredible person, and losing you was the worst consequence of all my terrible choices. I wish you nothing but the best. Brennan. Alessandra read the message twice, then set down her phone without responding. She did not need to respond. His apology, like Sloane's, changed nothing about the past and made no claims on her future. He was sorry. She had hurt him. That was enough. 3 days later, on a Friday evening, Alessandra attended Morrison and Klein's annual holiday party at the Grand Meridian Hotel, exactly 1 year after the event that had catalyzed everything. She wore a deep blue dress that complemented her dark hair, stood near the same bar where she had waited for Brennan 12 months earlier, and felt absolutely no echo of the pain and confusion that had marked that night. She mingled with colleagues, laughed at jokes, discussed upcoming projects, accepted congratulations on her promotion and success. People treated her with respect and warmth, no longer walking on eggshells around her or offering the careful sympathy reserved for victims. She was not a victim anymore, if she ever really had been. She was simply Alessandra, a talented professional, a good friend, a person building a life she genuinely loved. Around 10:30 in the evening, Alessandra found herself standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights, a glass of wine in her hand, feeling remarkably content. A year ago, she had been searching desperately for a husband who was betraying her. Tonight, she was simply enjoying a party, complete and sufficient unto herself, needing nothing and no one to validate her worth or define her identity. "Quite a difference from last year," a voice said beside her. She turned to find Patricia Reynolds holding her own glass of wine, her expression knowing and kind. "A world of difference," Alessandra agreed. "Last year I thought I knew who I was, what my life looked like, what my future held. I was wrong about all of it. But the person I have become since then, the life I have built, it is better than what I had before. More authentic, more mine." Patricia raised her glass in a quiet toast. "To surviving the worst and discovering you are stronger than you knew. To new beginnings," Alessandra responded, clinking her glass against Patricia's. "And to the wisdom that comes from pain properly processed and lessons actually learned." They stood together looking out at the city, two women who had navigated their own separate challenges and emerged intact, proof that devastation was not the end of the story, but sometimes the necessary catalyst for transformation that would not have happened any other way. Later that night, driving home to her apartment with its panoramic views and carefully chosen furniture, Alessandra thought about everything that had happened over the past year: the betrayal and investigation and divorce, the pain and grief and slow reconstruction, the unexpected kindness from people like Iris, and the hard-won wisdom from experiences she never would have chosen, but which had ultimately made her into someone stronger and clearer. She thought about Brennan struggling in Phoenix, about Sloane starting over in anonymity somewhere far away, about the comprehensive destruction they had brought upon themselves through choices that had seemed to offer pleasure in the moment, but had actually been seeds of devastation that took months to fully bloom. And she thought about herself, about the woman who had stood in a hotel corridor 12 months ago, smelling perfume and sensing betrayal, not yet knowing, but already beginning to understand, that her life was about to change irrevocably. If she could go back and speak to that version of herself, what would she say? Perhaps this: "You are about to go through hell, but you will survive it. You will discover strength you do not yet know you have. You will demand justice and receive it. You will rebuild your life into something better than what you are losing, and you will learn that betrayal defines the betrayer, not the betrayed, and that your worth was never determined by someone else's failure to recognize it." The following Monday, Alessandra walked into her office to find a message from building security on her desk. Routine notification, that they had received an inquiry about employment verification for a former employee. The name listed was Brennan Hartwell, and the requesting organization was a collection agency pursuing the unpaid balance on the company reimbursement agreement. So Brennan had also defaulted on his payments, was also facing wage garnishment and financial consequences, was also learning that actions had costs that extended far beyond the immediate moment. Alessandra filed the notification without responding, without any particular emotional reaction, simply noting the information and moving on with her day. He was not her responsibility, not her concern, not her problem to solve or situation to manage. He was simply someone who had made terrible choices and was now living with the results, and that seemed appropriate and just, and ultimately not her business at all. On a crisp morning in early January, just over a year after the holiday party, Alessandra stood in her apartment watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and pink. She held a cup of coffee, still warm from the machine, and felt profound gratitude for this life she had built from the wreckage of her marriage. She was 37 years old, divorced, living alone, navigating the world as a single woman rather than as someone's wife. A year ago, that prospect had seemed terrifying, a future she had not chosen and did not want. But now, standing in the morning light with the city spread out below her, and the day full of possibilities she would define entirely for herself, Alessandra recognized this solitude not as loneliness, but as freedom, not as loss, but as reclamation of self. Her phone buzzed with a text from Fletcher Whitmore. "Coffee this week. I want to introduce you to someone. I think you two would get along." Alessandra smiled, recognizing the gentle suggestion of a potential romantic introduction. Fletcher playing matchmaker with the confidence of someone who knew her well and cared about her happiness. She would go, would meet whoever Fletcher thought worthy of her time, would remain open to the possibility of future partnership while also being perfectly content if it led nowhere. Because that was the gift the past year had given her. The understanding that she was complete on her own, that another person could enhance her life but was not necessary to make it meaningful, and that she would never again settle for someone who did not deserve the extraordinary privilege of her trust and love. She responded to Fletcher, "I would love to. Wednesday afternoon work for you?" Another year would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments of joy and difficulty and growth. But Alessandra faced that future with confidence and clarity, secure in the knowledge that she had survived the worst and emerged not just intact, but fundamentally stronger. Betrayal had not broken her. It had revealed her resilience, her courage, her capacity to demand justice and rebuild from ruins. And in the end, that revelation was worth more than the comfort of beautiful lies. She was free. She was whole. She was ready for whatever came next. And that was the best revenge of all. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.